Chapter 200. Behind the scenes at this time. Jin Xian shot the most powerful attack in the form of horrifying Zhen Yuan, surging towards Yi Shiwen. The whole Merit Palace had begun to boil. Don't be so full of yourself. Yi Shiwen sneered and struck with his dragon claw, instantly forming a whirlwind of dragon qi. Boom. In just a flash, Jin Xian's attack was pulverized and the terrifying force present in Yi Shiwen's attack fiercely crashed into Jin Xian and sent his body spinning, which then severely crashed on a pillar and came crumbling down. Standing on the side, several disciples were stunned when they saw this scene. In just one move, Yi Shiwen effortlessly defeated Elder Jin Xian, as if it was nothing. Truth level power. A brother Yi is really a truth level expert, as the rumors said. Yes, truth level disciples hold high status, even elders do not dare to bully them. But this Yi Shiwen is so arrogant, he dared to raise hands on an elder. What elder? This elder is audacious. Hasn't he heard of Brother Ye's famous deeds? Even the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards died in his hands. He is certainly a highly cultured super genius of martial arts, but Jin Xian dares to obstruct Brother Ye's promotion. He is basically courting death. A disciple sneered. This thing must be reported top elders council, so that from now on, no one dares to offend Brother Yi. God, this Yi Shiwen's strength progresses too fast. I know because I joined Qinyu faction. Last time I saw him, he was not this much strong. A weakling like you wants to obstruct my promotion? Yi Shiwen sneered and looked at Jin Xian, who was miserably groaning on the ground. This was really the biggest mistake of his life. He shouldn't have obstructed Yi Shiwen's promotion. Since the disciples who got promoted to the true disciple rank weren't generally so strong. They usually were on truth first or second stage, and couldn't possibly be Jin Xian's opponents. But the same case didn't apply on Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, stop. At this time, a hoarse voice resounded in the Merit Palace. Yi Shiwen turned around and saw an old man in purple, and right now, there was a sort of smile on his face. Someone had informed the Penalty Palace about this conflict, and an elder came to mediate. Elders from Penalty Palace were usually strong enough to be able to mediate conflicts between rebellious powerhouses. Yi Shiwen recognized the pattern on this old man's clothes and found out that he was not just any elder from Penalty Palace, but he was actually the Lord of Penalty Palace. He held one of the strongest positions in Yuan School, right under sect head and the peak leaders. Even high-level true disciples were afraid of him, because he was never lenient when it came to punishments. Greetings to Penal Elder. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and respectfully said. Penal Elder saw the respectful look on Yi Shiwen's face, and nodded with a somewhat satisfied smile. He was informed that Yi Shiwen was arrogant, despotic and very rebellious, but now when he met Yi Shiwen in person, he appeared very humble. But he did not know that Yi Shiwen was simply not a humble person. Yi Shiwen followed the simply rule of tit for tat. He was the type who would return whatever was given to him tenfolds, whether it was respect or disrespect. Yi Shiwen's attitude towards people was completely determined by the attitude of the other side towards him. So Yi Shiwen's enemies would often feel that Yi Shiwen was very arrogant and despotic, while his friends would often feel that Yi Shiwen was someone they could get along with very well. Yi Shiwen believed that harmony between people was possible only if there was respect for each other. If people would give him face, he would also give them face, but if anyone would try to hurt him, then he would certainly not show any mercy. What's going on here? Penal Elder asked strictly, but there was no ill intent present in his voice. Yi Shiwen immediately calmed down when he realized that the other party was not actually his enemy. He could sense the aura of Penal Elder, and found out that he was half-step legendary expert, and his strength was second to only each of the peak leaders and the sect head. This Jin Xian has some ulterior motive. I don't know for whom he is working for, but he just now tried to obstruct my advancement to the rank of a true disciple. Yi Shiwen quietly explained. A smile appeared on the Penal Elder's face. This Yi Shiwen was really a straightforward guy and didn't hesitate to use brute force whenever he was facing injustice. In any case, Jin Xian was an elder of Yuan School, but he tried to suppress a truth-level disciple, which was not something an elder should do. He was the culprit in this case and must be punished. Well, indeed, Jin Xian is really quite audacious. But don't you worry, I will investigate this matter thoroughly and make sure he is punished. Penal Elder immediately began implementing his powers as the Lord of Penalty Palace, because as long as there was violation of regulations, he was eligible to intervene, but was also secretly speechless at the authority of Penal Elder, though Jin Xian was at wrong in this case, but to be able to arrest an elder so easily, this really showed his supreme authority in Yiyuan school. And one must not forget that Jin Xian was associated with influential Luo clan, so this also showed that Penal Elder was not at all bothered to give face to Luo clan. I heard about your achievements in Qianji Island. Your actions have boosted the prestige of Yiyuan school. Since your cultivation is already at Truth 3rd stage, so there won't be any problem in give you promotion. Penal Elder said. I will report it to the Elders' Council, and soon, you will become a true disciple. A mountain peak will be exclusively prepared for you as well. When Jim Xian was taken into custody by Penalty Palace, it set off huge commotion in Yiyuan school, and immediately, Elders' Conference was organized to discuss about this matter. Yi Shiwen is too much, he actually beat up a merit elder, how dare he look down on the sect? Tian Wushuang roared and seemed very angry, which was understandable because he was the Lord of Merit Palace and what Yi Shiwen did was simply like a great insult to him. Wu Patian, the head of Yiyuan school, was sitting on the main seat and addressing to the conference. There was a solemn look on his face and no one knew what he was thinking. This thing went really out of hand, especially because Yi Shiwen is involved in it. We all know about his achievements and his importance for our sect, so the matter regarding his promotion to the rank of true disciple must be reported to Elders' Council, and should be done properly. It should be very clear that true disciples hold utmost importance in our sect. I don't need to repeat myself over and over, you all already know what I am trying to say. Penal Elder said in a strong tone. Several elders nodded. There had been many disputes in Yiyuan school, despite the strict regulation by penal code. In fact, it was all to encourage competition among each other for the growth of all, but only few people actually involved in friendly matches and maintained peace. It was simply impossible for everyone to maintain such friendly attitude, because people usually held ulterior motives, and forget about disciples. Even some of the elders had their own selfish reasons, so expecting everyone to be selfless was basically impossible. So long as the dispute was still within the scope of control, they could try to calm things down. But the bottom line was that the future prosperity of Yiyuan school was directly proportional to the number of true disciples. It would directly determine how this sect would perform in the next few hundred years, so no one should look down on such rare valuable treasures called true disciples. Jin Xian indeed did something that was strictly not allowed in Yiyuan school. No wonder it alerted the Elders' Council, and he was dragged away mercilessly by the Penalty Palace. And Jin Xian not only attempted to embarrass Yi Shiwen, he went one step ahead and attacked as well, which strictly violates the regulations of the sect. I even suspect that someone is pulling his strings. Penal Elder coldly said. The other elders didn't answer because none of them believed that Jin Xian had been ordered by someone to attack Yi Shiwen. Who would be so stupid to plan an attack on a war hero like Yi Shiwen? Everyone knew that Yi Shiwen single-handedly defeated a terrifying devil expert of small truth level. Even if right now he was truth 3rd level, everyone had come to see him as someone comparable to 8th Prince. Jin Xian was merely at truth 3rd stage, so who would send him to attack Yi Shiwen? It was just like sending someone to their own death. So one thing was certain, that Jin Xian was not ordered by someone to humiliate and attack Yi Shiwen. When none of the elders said anything, Penal Elder continued. I find Jin Xian as guilty in this matter and he must be punished. Chapter 201. 5th Prodisciple. If you do not punish him, then from here on, no one will obey the regulations of Yiyuan school, especially when it comes to such fundamental rules. Penal Elder said. I think Jin Xian elders did not do it intentionally. He must have wanted to test the strength of Yi Shiwen. At this time, Tian Wushuang didn't know what to say in order to protect Jin Xian, except to prove Jin Xian as a stupid person who was unaware of Yi Shiwen's strength and dared to get involved in such a matter. The most stupid kind of guy who just wanted to show off his strength in front of a junior. So you think that he is just a stupid guy who tried to test Yi Shiwen's strength? Who would believe such an excuse? Penal Elder said coldly. Who doesn't know about the events that took place on Qianji Island? It was Yi Shiwen who provided accurate information and helped us avoid what could have been a very serious loss to our sect. And thanks to that vital information, we managed to wipe out the enemy forces of Bai Majiao. And not just that, it also created a very good opportunity for Yi Yuan School to set up its reputation as an invincible force in front of the other major forces. In the future, no one would dare to look down on our younger generation. Now, everyone has seen the true talent of Yi Shiwen, but there's a chance that he may have some hidden strengths that we still haven't seen. Various forces have already recognized his strength, and in the future, he is likely to have a duel with the 8th Prince and the other top players of the younger generation. Our job should be to safeguard Yi Shiwen, the only hope of leading our younger generation in this race so that Yi Yuan School doesn't close face in front of other sections. Penal Elder said. Although the other elders did not speak, but they clearly agreed with whatever Penal Elder said just now. Some of the elders wanted to object, but they couldn't do it openly. But objection was clearly visible in their eyes. Such a genius, there's no limit to the amount of care and support we must provide him with. We must not forget that after we old people are not there to protect the sect, we will have to rely on the younger generation to ensure the safety, security of Yi Yuan School. Only they will be able to maintain our sect's elaborate reputation and keep it going in the future. Penal Elder said and glanced at those elders who were showing signs of objection through their eyes. Everyone suddenly turned their faces sideways and looked at each other. After all, none of the elders participating in this meeting were at low rank. All of them held high positions and were extremely old, to the extent that most of them would not live another 100 years to look after the well-being of their sect. And how old was Yi Shiwen? He was merely about 20 years old, and his cultivation would grant him a lifespan of about 400 years, which was an entire generation of life. Today, if they really offended such a peerless genius, then in the future, looking at Yi Shiwen's promising talent and unimaginable growth rate, perhaps they might have to face serious consequences. By then, in their absence, Yi Shiwen would have surpassed them all, and even their successors might also have to face Yi Shiwen's wrath. Yi Shiwen had so much potential and talent that in the future, he would most likely become a peak leader, and later, he might even become the head of Yi Yuan School. Was it really worth to offend Yi Shiwen? After witnessing the recent events, now no one would dare to underestimate Yi Shiwen, because they had come to realize that Yi Shiwen's talent was actually transcendent. They felt somewhat strange in their hearts, trying to figure out why was Penal Elder helping Yi Shiwen. They didn't know that Penal Elder was doing this to give a serious blow to Luo clan's influence, which would ultimately also affect Chu Jingxai's influence. Also, he wanted to tie a friendly knot between Huang Luochen and Yi Shiwen, because this would ultimately increase the influence of Huang Luochen. So long as one had enough common sense, one would not want to offend Yi Shiwen, and certainly wouldn't try to make an enemy out of him. Penal Elder wanted to win over Yi Shiwen's trust and support for Huang Luochen. If Yi Shiwen agreed to join Huang Luochen's faction, then that would be a great addition, and would certainly give a boost to his influence over other pro-disciples. And even if Yi Shiwen doesn't agree to join, after growing strong in the future, he would certainly support Huang Luochen, and would be just like icing on the cake. Yi Shiwen demonstrated endless potential, and no one could predict how strong he would become in the future. So it was for the best to not offend such a person, and an experienced old guy like him certainly understood such a basic point. Everyone looked at Wu Patian and waited for him to state the final judgment. Wu Patian, at this time, no longer looked indifferent. Instead, he glanced at the crowd and said, Jin Xian will be stripped of his elder's identity and sent to guard the mines. That's my final decision. Suddenly, everyone was shocked in their hearts. Getting stripped of the identity of an elder, for Jin Xian, it was worse than dying. There were no small benefits for elders, which were especially necessary for later practice, because as the cultivation grew, more and more practice resources were required for further advancing to the next realm. After all, not everyone was daring like Yi Shiwen, who roamed about everywhere and plundered many resources whenever required. For most people, the resources granted by sect was the main source of strength, and also the safest way. Without the resources granted by the sect, Jin Xian's further practice would be extremely difficult, and considering his almost finished lifespan, It was a very serious punishment. But since the head had already made a decision, including Tian Wushuang, no one dared to refute. One more thing, Yi Zaihui needs to be immediately promoted to the rank of other 4 prodisciples. Wu Potion's next sentence suddenly startled all of the elders, because everybody expected him to be promoted to the rank of true disciples. Whether it was strength or credit, Yi Zaiwen had more than enough. Yi Shiwen indeed deserved to be promoted to a true disciple. But to be placed among the 4 strongest true disciples was simply unexpected for everyone. It could be said that although there were hundreds of true disciples in Yiyuan school, but only the most distinguished and peerless geniuses were allowed to be called as the prodisciples, and only they were allowed to compete for the position of head. These prodisciples held strength, prestige and personal connections, making them much superior to other true disciples. Prodisciples were considered elites even among the elites like true disciples. In the past 100 years, there were only 4 who managed to achieve this rank. But today, Wu Patian unexpectedly added Yi Shiwen to the same rank, which suggested that Yi Zaiwen would have such an elaborate and promising future that his success might be comparable with that of the 4 prodisciples. The last time when Wu Patian made such a judgment, Qi Fifan had an extraordinary rise in both fame and strength. At that time, no one expected that Qi Fifan would become such a legendary expert in the future, but Wu Patian was able to make a correct judgment about him. This was the second time Wu Patian made such a judgment. So did it mean that Yi Shiwen would become a possible future rival for Qi Fifan? But while they were extremely dismayed, no one dared to question Wu Potion's decision. Yiyuan School's inheritance was an accumulation of so many years, and they certainly focused on cultivating geniuses. As long as they could nurture a true genius, the sect was willing to devote a lot of resources for it. This was also one of the main reasons how Yiyuan School was able to stand tall for so many years. I hope everyone is aware of the declaration of duel to Yi Shiwen from the 8th Prince. Wu Patian looked at the crowd and asked. Everyone nodded. This duel will be cancelled, no matter what happens, it must be cancelled. Wu Patian said. Yi Shiwen's practice time is still short. This duel will be scheduled to some other time, when he is sufficiently strong to be able to deal with 8th Prince and the others. Yi Shiwen is the new backbone of the younger generation of Yiyuan School. We cannot afford to lose him. All of the elders nodded because they too agreed with Wu Potion's idea. After all, expect Yi Shiwen, no of the other disciples lived up to the expectations. One must know that Luo Yifan was considered the leader of younger generation in Yiyuan School, and he was nothing compared to the 8th Prince. The gap between them was extremely big, but Yi Shiwen rose up as a new ray of hope for Yiyuan School. While dealing with an evildoer, let evildoer do the job. Thinking about it, when Qi Fifan rose to fame, none of the other major forces was able to put forth a strong rival for him, making them utterly depressed. In fact, a lot of people said that perhaps Qi Fifan took birth in the wrong era. He should have taken birth in the era of 8th Prince. Then Yiyuan School wouldn't have to face such embarrassment. In the recent years, Yiyuan School couldn't produce a competent rival for the 8th Prince. But now, finally, Yi Shiwen came into picture, showing the ability to compete with 8th Prince and the other top players in same generation. It would generally take a lot of time and resources to nurture a peerless genius, but now, with the unexpected rise of Yi Shiwen, they would certainly not let him die early. Yiyuan School had sufficient grounds to protect Yi Shiwen. Quite simple, Yi Shiwen was significantly younger than 8th Prince, so he must be allowed to train for 10 more years, then he would have the ability to compete with the 8th Prince. Unconsciously, they were all very confident of Yi Shiwen. After all, despite being so young, if he was able to kill Feng Kong, the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards, then in the next 10 years, people believed that he would at least catch up with 8th Prince and the others. Everyone wanted him to defeat the 8th Prince. If the 8th Prince doesn't stop, then I will personally go into action and protect Yi Shiwen. Wu Patian said in a cold voice. Chapter 202. Qianyu Peak. The news about Yi Shiwen's promotion to a prodisciple stirred things up in Yiyuan School. Everyone was waiting to learn about what happened with Jin Xian, but they never expected such an outcome. The news spread like wild forest fire that Elder Jin Xian was deprived of his elder's identity and sent to guard a mine. whereas Yi Shiwen was promoted to the rank of a true disciple, which was an obvious result. But gaining the rank of a pro-disciple shocked everyone. Of course, this time, the value of a merit elder faded away in front of Yi Shiwen, the long-awaited priceless star of the sect. But everyone was surprised to find out the head himself promoted Yi Shiwen to the rank of pro-disciple. The same thing happened once before with Qi Fifan. He took the place of fourth pro-disciple, and he later became a legend in Yiyuan school. And now, after Qi Fifan, Yi Shiwen took the fifth place. Last time, just when Qi Fifan had become a pro-disciple, there was a sudden growth in his popularity. There was also a sudden rise of his faction, both in terms of strength and size, and thanks to that, his followers had also received great advantages. So now it seemed like Yi Shiwen would also have a similar rise like Qi Fifan had, and many people wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. After all, anyone would want to wash hands in a flowing river. This Yi Shiwen is really too incredible. The elder Jin Xian was not only beaten by him, but was also deprived of his elder's identity. Well, of course, Yi Shiwen has become the fifth pro-disciple, whereas Jin Xian is merely an ordinary elder. There's no comparison between the two. I tell you, this Yi Shiwen is simply a legend, a myth, and now with the rise in his status, the disciples of Qinyu faction will have a meteoric rise in strength and status. It's no longer the faction of newbies, because now, it belongs to a pro-disciple. Unfortunately, I did not join early, and even if I go now and join Qinyu faction, I am afraid I won't be able to get the higher ranks. Yes, even the head said that he is personally going to protect Yi Shiwen. I was worried that Yi Shiwen might be killed by the 8th prince, but now I am assured that within the protection of our head, even if the 8th prince dares to come, he will meet his tragic end. Everyone was discussing about Yi Shiwen. But for Yi Shiwen, the most important thing was to receive control Ophi's peak from the sect. It was a tall mountain, and it seemed as if the peak of this mountain was floating in the sky. Without taking much time, Yi Shiwen named it Qinyu Peak. Anyway, he had decided the name long ago, so he didn't spend much time while naming it. And afterwards, Qinyu Peak would become the permanent residence of Qinyu faction, and all of the disciples of Qinyu faction would over there to live. Not to mention, the size of Qinyu Peak was more than enough to accommodate thousands of people. But as of now, there were few hundred disciples in Qinyu faction, and accommodating them should not be a big deal. Not to mention, most of the disciples still lived in their respective 10 peaks, so basically, not even 100 disciples were going to live on Qinyu Peak. It was a great news for Qinyu disciples because their leader, Yi Shiwen, not only became a true disciple, he also became a pro-disciple with only 4 other at the same rank. There was a heaven and earth's difference between an ordinary true disciple and a pro-disciple. Yi Shiwen took control of Qinyu Peak from an elder, and the first thing he did was to give full access to Qinyu faction. This peak was already like a war fortress with several Zhen methods for attack and defense, but they only activated in the most critical situations, and under normal circumstances, there was no way to activate these mechanisms. Yi Shiwen was not satisfied with the defense mechanisms, and directly deployed the poisonous dragon water control flag array. Several deepwater black serpents congealed out of nowhere, and completely surrounded the Qinyu Peak from all directions. It seemed as if the peak was being invaded by these serpents, and the defense mechanisms immediately activated. But as suspected, these defense mechanisms were not satisfactory. However, Yi Shiwen's poisonous water dragon control flag array was enough to serve as a formidable defense for the Qinyu Peak. And most importantly, there was a spiritual artery buried on Qinyu Peak, although the Lingqi present was not generally sufficient. But since the flag array would be perennially buried in the spiritual artery, so over time, it would continue to enhance the quality of the flag. In fact, even Yi Shiwen couldn't make a guess about the rise in energy with the passage of time. Of course, if necessary, Yi Shiwen could come back at any time to protect Qinyu Peak. After Yi Shiwen acquired control of Qinyu Peak, it didn't take long for the news to spread throughout the sect, and soon many people, who were already interested in Yi Shiwen's strength and glory, discovered that right after he entered the Qinyu Peak, several deepwater black serpents came out of nowhere and surrounded the peak. They were roaring nonstop and their killing intention was crazily soaring in all directions. And since now the flag array was rooted into the spiritual artery of Qinyu Peak, It was able to display far more power when compared to how it used to perform in the hands of Yi Shiwen. What a terrifying killer Zhen method! What kind of killer Zhen method has Yi Shiwen buried in his peak? His killing method has taken over the sky itself, waiting to attack the prey. What is this killer Zhen method? How come I've never seen it before? An elder said and looked at Yi Shiwen, who at this time was planting the poisonous dragon water control flag array into the spiritual artery. The gazes of many true disciples, elders and other powerhouses were glued to Yi Shiwen, and the reason was quite simple. They just wanted to learn more about the fifth pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school, and would he be able to create legend like Qi Fifan? Immediately after Yi Shiwen was done burying the flag array, suddenly, Lingqi gushed out from Qinyu Peak and completely enveloped it in large stalks of surging Lingqi. Everyone looked at this scene with look of terror and shock in their eyes. What's going on? From where did all this Lingqi suddenly emerge onto the mountain peak? It seems like a Zhen method which forcefully extracts Lingqi out of the spiritual artery, and then seals it off. Yes, extravagant, and if this continues soon, the huge concentration of Lingqi on the peak will eventually liquefy, but this way the spiritual artery will be consumed very fast and may get depleted within a century or so. What are you talking about? He has managed to extract Lingqi faster from the spiritual artery. The sect would definitely praise him for it. Yes, we should not forget that now he is a pro-disciple and owns superior treatment even when compared to true disciples. Most of the disciples were envious but were rather more shocked, because they did not know how Yi Shiwen managed to get his hands on so many top-level Zhen methods. Including many of the true disciples, even the elders were in a state of shock, because in such a short time, Yi Shiwen managed to implement such a potent Zhen method that it was basically sucking Lingqi out of Millennium's old spiritual artery. From where did he grasp such a powerful Zhen method? Such concentration of Lingqi was almost comparable to the Holy Lands of Yi Yuan school, which were formed only after many years of conservation. Although there would be a shocking consumption rate because of this, but in general, it would do more good than harm. Especially, a lot of forces were still holding hostility for Yi Shiwen, but now that they saw his performance with their own eyes, they came to realize that his capabilities were already far beyond their imagination, and it was literally impossible to deal with him. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yi Shiwen, the fifth pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school. Just now I acquired a mountain peak of my own, and named it Qinyu Peak. From hereby onwards, it is going to be the residence and headquarters of Qinyu faction. Later, if I find out that someone tried to aim their evil intentions towards Qinyu Peak or my people in my absence, I will make sure to obliterate your existence from this world. Yi Shiwen's voice burst out from Qinyu Peak and spread throughout Yi Yuan school like a storm. Everyone was secretly speechless after they discovered the depth of Yi Shiwen's skill. To be able to send his voice surging and trembling throughout the expanse of humongous Yi Yuan school was not something an ordinary true disciple could achieve. Just how unimaginably deep his skill actually was, and was he really a true third-stage true disciple? After listening to his overwhelming battle cry-like announcement, although many people still could not pinpoint his strength level, but at least now they understood why he was made a pro-disciple by the head. Qinyu faction is really lucky. Having a pro-disciple in the faction means their future prospects are simply unimaginable. Not to forget, disciples of Qinyu faction are going to live in a practice environment of Qinyu Peak, which is rich in Lingqi, which is concentrated enough to be on the verge of liquefying. Only top-level elders, peak leaders and head of the sect are able to access such a kind of practice environment, but now it's accessible to Qinyu faction. It's like they are going to get the same treatment as top elders and leaders of the sect. In such a short time, Yi Shiwen not only became a true disciple, but also managed to obtain the title of a pro-disciple. But looking at his qualifications, it will still take a lot of time for him to achieve the level of other four pro-disciples. Yes, but you must consider the fact that other four pro-disciples have been around for decades and almost a century, but in comparison, Yi Shiwen is just 20 years old and still became a pro-disciple. But just think, he is just 20 years old and has a lifespan of 400 years. There are so many decades left for him to break through the heavens. With his talent and the kind of importance he holds for the sect, unless and until he doesn't end up dead in some conspiracy, I'm afraid his future prospects are extraordinary. Chapter 203. One Xiantian for each Yi Shiwen was busy day and night, implementing many Zhen methods taught by his in-house magic professor, Yi Mo. With all of the strategically implemented Zhen methods, the entire Qianyu Peak looked like paradise on earth, especially because of the planted heavenly treasures, all of which had matured overnight. There was a burst of herbal fragrance when the liquefied lingqi helped in quick production of herbs, which generally took 100 years, or more than a millennium to fully mature. But right now, all of them were present in Yi Shiwen's medicinal garden. However, one must admit that the treatment of prodisciples in Yi Yuan school was simply unimaginably good. Even Yi Shiwen had not thought that he would actually be able to own a medicinal garden where he could grow heavenly treasures. Not to mention he also obtained spiritual arteries buried under his peak. In fact, there were several herbal gardens in Yi Yuan school and prodisciples used to get an open supply of herbs from there, perennially. Of course, although prodisciples could take any herb from the garden, but there was a monthly limit, and if exceeded, they might have to purchase those herbs with spirit stones, but still prodisciples always enjoyed preference over other disciples. My God, so many herbs have ripened overnight. You know, there are many of them that need several years to fully mature, and some actually need several hundred years, but all of these matured overnight. Many disciples were stunned to witness such a scene. This outcome was possible because of endless supply of lingqi to the garden, which helped with the early ripening. After all, these herbs needed to absorb huge amounts of lingqi to fully mature, and under normal conditions, it would take several years to slowly accumulate so much lingqi from the atmosphere. But now that Yi Shiwen could provide them with endless support of lingqi, it accelerated the ripening speed. For a time, the entire Qianyu Peak was filled with herbal fragrance, and was attracting the attention of everyone. Originally, Qianyu Peak was already a sacred ground with its own spiritual artery and medicinal garden. But now, with Yi Shiwen's interference, it had simply become the holy land for practicing martial arts. By this time, everyone had come to realize that Yi Shiwen was no ordinary existence, and knew extraordinary means that were simply unheard of, things that were never seen before. They did not know that more than half of these secret methods were taught to Yi Shiwen by Yi Mo, otherwise how could he possibly know about so many magical techniques? Although Yi Mo was just a spiritual being, but was very wise and clearly knew about many magical techniques. After this night, Yi Shiwen's prestige soared to a whole new level, though still worse compared to the 4 prodisciples, but it was clearly above ordinary true disciples. Many people had already seen through the potential of Yi Shiwen's plan. He had basically turned Qianyu Peak into a holy ground for practicing martial arts, and if a Houtian or Xiantian expert was to practice there, then it won't be a problem for them to cross the threshold and step into the next realm. To be able to break from Xiantian realm to truth realm, this was a huge attraction for almost all Xiantian experts. To think about it, there were tens of thousands of core disciples, but there were only few hundred true disciples, and that too was the result of accumulation for several decades or centuries. On an average, only 1 out of several hundred core disciples managed to step into truth realm, but by practicing on Qianyu Peak, one could experience an increase in success rate to a considerable extent. After all, the disciples of Qianyu faction would enjoy top-notch practice conditions which were accessible only to the top-level elders of Yi Yuan school. Yi Shiwen suddenly became an unsurpassable legendary figure in the hearts of all. After completion of arrangements on Qianyu Peak, Yi Shiwen summoned some of the top-level officials of Qianyu faction. In fact, he called Yi Feng and the others. "Brother, you're too much." Yi Wuxia patted on the shoulder of Yi Shiwen and said with a pleased look on her face, "If we practice in such an environment, then it will be more effective, and in the future, we can hope to step into the truth realm." Of course, the truth realm is something that must be achieved by all. Yi Shiwen said, "And at this point I'll help you." For Yi Shiwen, his family and friends were a very important part of his life, and by achieving truth realm, an expert's lifespan could reach up to 400–500 years. Within the coming 2 centuries, his family members and friends would be dead if they didn't manage to step into truth realm. So he must take measures now itself. Moreover, both Yi Wuxia and Yi Feng were extremely talented, and even without Yi Shiwen's help, in the next couple of decades, they would naturally become the rare stars of Yiyuan school. And as long as they wouldn't face any accident, reaching the truth realm shouldn't be a problem. Not to mention, if they were to receive help from Yi Shiwen, then they would be able to achieve it faster and much more efficiently. And after becoming true disciples, they would certainly add up to Yi Shiwen's force as excellent allies and strong faction officials. Some people were really excited, although they had been called a genius by peers and elders, but the current situation was still very exciting for them all. After all, they were still too far from the truth realm. Excluding a legendary evildoer like Yi Shiwen, who was simply an anomaly, according to their estimates, it would probably take 2 or 3 decades for them to step into the truth realm, or maybe longer. But now with Yi Shiwen's help in the form of endless practice resources and excellent practice environment of Qinyu Peak, there was no doubt that their cultivation would increase by leaps and bounds. And in a short time, they would definitely break through to the truth realm. They were extremely excited because even if they were considered as genius newbies of Yiyuan school, but there was still a huge gap between them and true disciples. Since now I have been promoted to the rank of a pro-disciple, there will certainly be a lot of people who want to join Qinyu faction. Yi Shiwen said in a calm manner, and everyone nodded. What he said was true because earlier, he just held the enormous potential to step into the truth realm, but now he finally became a true disciple, and not just that, now he also held the title of 5th pro-disciple, so those who were still waiting to join would certainly not miss this opportunity. But what I mean to say is that we cannot recruit too many people. Our focus should be to recruit only elites. Yi Shiwen said, and basically meant that rather than turning Qinyu into a bulky faction like many other factions of true disciples, they must aim to become an elite faction by recruiting only elites. Those who are already a part of Qinyu faction will be called as original disciples, and the new ones, who want to join now, must fulfill the minimum requirement of being at Xiantian 7th stage. I repeat, we only recruit people with great potential. Everyone nodded because if before, a Xiantian 7th stage expert was willing to join Qinyu faction, they would be overjoyed, but now the situation was different. I know that we have a lot of Hotian level disciples in out factions compared to other factions. Yi Shiwen said with a smile, because the establishment of Qinyu faction was based on the new disciples. Only 1/3 of these new disciples were in Xiantian realm, the remaining 2/3 were still in Hotian realm. Later in the last 1 year's time, 1/3 of them managed to step into Xiantian realm, while remaining 1/3 were still at the peak of Hotian 9th stage. It would take more than a year for the rest of them to naturally step into the Xiantian realm. But Yi Shiwen wanted to increase the overall strength of Qinyu faction in a short time. And since these new disciples represented the original strength of the faction when compared to new additions, so Yi Shiwen wanted all of them to get stronger as fast as possible. His main motive was to help them step into the truth realm, and only by achieving this motive, Qinyu faction would become self-sufficient. So I intend to set up an alchemy furnace. Yi Shiwen said, I am going to refine hundreds of Xiantian Dawn for the members of Qinyu factions who are still in Hotian realm. I think that all of the members of our faction must be in Xiantian realm. Everyone was surprised for a moment. Yi Shiwen was so generous. After all, even 100 Xiantian Dan was not a small sum. Thinking about it, although these people were considered as geniuses in their previous respective subsects but still didn't have possessed Xiantian Dan, which was such an important item for having a successful breakthrough from Hotian to Xiantian realm. But now, Yi Shiwen was going to openly refine and distribute Xiantian Dan among them. Now it was like Xiantian Dan was no different from vegetables, and was being openly distributed in public interest, so everyone could have one. Also, many people were curious to know how Yi Shiwen managed to get his hands on the alchemical formula of Xiantian Dan, and what kind of method would he apply to refine hundreds of Xiantian Dan. They certainly did not know that for Yi Shiwen, alchemy was not a difficult thing. He had already learnt many superior alchemy approaches and methods under the mentorship of Yi Mo. Yi Shiwen was going to follow these much more efficient methods to refine Xiantian Dan in bulk, and by following Yi Mo's refining method, even the efficacy of these Dan would be much better than usual. In addition, I will be refining some of the Hehe Dan as well, so the experts at Xiantian 5th stage can have the breakthrough and practice further into the subsequent stages of Xiantian realm. Yi Shiwen said, Then I will refining a lot of Ling Dan for everyone to use. Basically, from here on, the senior executives of Qinyu faction will be able to raise up their cultivation at an extremely fast rate. Of course, Yi Shiwen was refining immortality pills at the perfection level by relying on superior alchemy techniques taught by Yi Mo. And when consumed, they would leave no after-effects, hence allowing them to enhance the strength in shortest possible time. There were a lot of things that Yi Shiwen personally could not do. After all, he was a prototype and might have to deal with a lot of things, so he would have to greatly enhance the strength of the executives of Qinyu faction. Chapter 204. Sensation in Yiyuan School. Yi Shiwen finally decided to focus in alchemy and took out the huge alchemy tripod, seized from crazy shark pirates, and began to work on it. By constantly practicing the art of alchemy in the mysterious space, he had already reached the pinnacle of this art, and now he was way better at it than those other old alchemists. In fact, when considering the teachings of Yi Mo, his skills would be earth-shattering. There were many rumors spreading everywhere that Yi Shiwen was able to refine many treasures whose formulae had been lost for several years. Although he knew alchemy and he also had a top-class alchemy furnace, but the most important thing was the amount of raw materials in his possession. Even if he had all the required infrastructure to produce something, he would still need enough raw materials. No matter what kind of immortality pill was to be produced, a lot of herbs were required along with huge supply of lingqi to carry out alchemical reactions. Now there was no shortage of lingqi since there was endless supply of it in Qianyu Peak, and to such an extent that lingqi was getting liquefied on Qianyu Peak. This phenomenon was actually comparable to the spiritual shrine of Yiyuan School. And now, thanks to endless supply of concentrated lingqi, Yi Shiwen created a lush garden of medicinal herbs overnight. All of the fruits ripened and flowers bloomed overnight, and the overall production was lavish. Basically, there would be no lack of herbs and medicine for Yi Shiwen. The disciples of Qinyu faction were collecting the herbs from garden and taking them over to the place where alchemy furnace was placed. He was just sitting before the furnace and continuously casting alchemy techniques day and night to produce dawn. For the first few days, he was planning to refine only Xiantian dawn. It could be considered as the most simple prescription, and he knew the secret process to refine it. Some medicinal herbs were required for refining Xiantian dan, but Yi Shiwen wasn't bothered since now he owned a medicinal garden, where all kinds of herbs could be found, and even new herbs could be grown within a matter of minutes. This was something only Yi Shiwen could do. In fact, only he could afford to do so. Yi Shiwen was able to refine few hundred Xiantian dan in just one day's refining, and one must know that it's insane. Even the most veteran alchemists were able to refine a batch of 20 to 30 Xiantian dan in one day, which was the reason why dan were generally so expensive. With the help of so many Xiantian dan, refined by Yi Shiwen, many breakthroughs into Xiantian realm cropped up one after another on Qinyu Peak, and spread huge torrents of auras on the peak. A month's time passed in a blink of an eye, and in this month, many of the disciples of Qinyu faction leveled up considerably. No one expected that these big movements would continue to occur for the whole month. First, the original members of Qinyu faction broke through from Hotian to Xiantian realm, and those who were already in Xiantian realm also stepped into further stages after multiple breakthroughs. The senior members of Qinyu faction, who were at Xiantian 4th or 5th stage, also had breakthroughs during this month and successfully stepped into Xiantian Shao realm, while some members also stepped into Xiantian 6th stage. In this short period of time, there was a qualitative mutation in Qinyu faction, and its strength increased by leaps and bounds, as the core members suddenly leveled up. Thanks to this sudden increase in strength by leaps and bounds, now Qinyu faction could be considered as a middle-level faction. Although it was still not comparable with the factions of other four prodisciples in terms of strength, but since only 1 month had passed after Yi Shiwen became a prodisciple, one could imagine the growth potential of this faction. Soon, a big news spread throughout the sect that the 5th prodisciple, Yi Shiwen, had set up an alchemy furnace on Qianyu Peak and was refining a large number of immortality pills, but instead of keeping them for himself, he was distributing it among the disciples of Qinyu faction, and as a result, their cultivation was increasing by leaps and bounds. At this rate, perhaps Qinyu faction would be able to catch up with ordinary true disciple factions in a very short period of time, although there would still be a big gap between his faction and the 4 other pro-factions, but the speed was already amazingly quick. When everyone got to know that Yi Shiwen was bleeding money to train members of Qinyu faction, suddenly numerous disciples were envious and wanted to join, but it was too late now. Earlier, when the standards to join Qinyu faction were very low, they were just waiting and watching, and now when Yi Shiwen actually became a pro-disciple, the standard requirements suddenly became much higher, and they had no chance but to give up. Qinyu faction suddenly became the faction of elites, and if someone wanted to join it, the minimum requisite was to have one's cultivation at Xiantian 7th stage. But seeing the recruitment criteria of Qinyu faction, suddenly a lot of factions were at ease because it seemed like Qinyu faction was choosing the route of the elites and not expanding rapidly. And since Yi Shiwen did not intend to expand rapidly, then they could also cooperate. After all, if Yi Shiwen started open recruitment, without any prerequisites, then perhaps all of the idle disciples of Yiyuan school would come running to join Qinyu faction. Just because Yi Shiwen had kept high standards which included that the experts must be at Xiantian 7th stage at least and not older than 100 years old, and they must hold some kind of potential. During this month, Qinyu faction was recruiting members, but less than 70 to 80 people actually passed the requirement criteria, so the overall impact was not great. Then another mind-boggling news spread out that Yi Shiwen was not just refining immortality pills, but also refining Ling Dan. This suddenly alarmed many disciples, because they could ignore Xiantian Dan for once as they basically had no use of it, but the emergence of Ling Dan suddenly alarmed many true disciples. Because the so-called Ling Dan was actually produced by condensing the Lingqi present in the air. A Ling Dan was made up of pure Lingqi without any impurities, and when absorbed, its efficiency was much more when compared to directly absorbing Lingqi from atmosphere or spirit stones. Lingqi could be absorbed from spirit stones, but there were still many impurities in them. But in case of Ling Dan, there were fewer impurities and contained higher quantity of Lingqi, hence it had better quality and efficacy. Just like there was huge difference between low-grade spirit stones and high-grade spirit stones, there was a considerable difference between top-grade spirit stones and Ling Dan. One Ling Dan was comparable to several top-grade spirit stones, and even the absorption efficiency of spirit stones was nowhere close to a Ling Dan. But ordinary experts could not refine Ling Dan. Only masters of truth 6th stage and above were capable of refining Ling Dan. In fact, even masters of small truth could not refine Ling Dan. Only after reaching truth 6th stage, one was able to enter an entirely new level of understanding of world laws, and that's the reason why experts of truth 6th stage and above could condense Ling Dan. There was no need of alchemy furnace to condense Ling Dan. A true disciple could basically use his hand to condense Ling Dan. But most people, not even the master of truth 6th stage, could condense Ling Dan with high efficiency, and it would take more than 1 day in the completion of condensation process. If it was a half-step legendary master like Qi Fifan, then he might actually condense 1,000 Ling Dan in a day. So Ling Dan was considered a hard currency in Wuxia. But for truth 6th stage experts, the condensed out Ling Dan were not enough even for their own use, then how could they possibly sell it to others? Of course, if they spent enough time then they would be able to condense many Ling Dan. But one must know that time was precious for truth-level masters. And it was necessary to save every minute to be able to have the next breakthrough, so they couldn't spend much time on condensing Ling Dan. Although Ling Dan could be mass-produced using alchemy furnace, but truth-level masters would rarely use Ito-condensed Ling Dan, because it was extremely difficult to get one's hands on one. So Ling Dan was always in a state of out of stock in Wuxia, and basically began with the best exchange rate that could reach more than 100 or so, because of short supply. And now when the news spread out from Qinyu Peak about availability of large number of Ling Dan for exchange with spirit stones, it suddenly shocked countless disciples, and most of them were the true disciples who were suffering from lack of practice resources. While the conversion efficiency of absorption of Lingqi from spirit stones was pretty good, but it was nowhere close to that of a Ling Dan. But usually it was very difficult to obtain a Ling Dan, so even truth 6th stage disciples were very excited after hearing this news. Although they could refine their own Ling Dan, But the question was that should they spend their precious time on it? Anyway, their refining speed wouldn't be as good as an alchemy furnace, and as long as they managed to break through to the legendary realm, it would be worth it since their lifespans would once again increase considerable, not to mention self-refined Ling Dan wouldn't necessarily support their practice. Ling Dan had become a hard currency because it had always remained a scarce resource, and due to its purity, most people still preferred it over spirit stones. After the news spread throughout Yuan school, many eyes turned towards Qinyu Peak. Also, several disciples could be seen rushing towards Qinyu Peak. Yi Shiwen, are you really refining lots of Ling Dan? Early in the morning, Hua Minghan arrived in front of Yi Shiwen and asked curiously. Last time he saw her, it was 1 month ago, and he was quite surprised to notice the increase in her strength in just 1 month's time. Because he clearly saw that Hua Minghan actually stepped into Truth Realm in this month. Although she still had an unstable aura, but there was no doubt that she has firmly entered into the Truth Realm. The birth of a true disciple was very rare, and always caused huge sensation throughout the sect. The promotion ceremony was accompanied with grand celebration in the entire sect, but this time, Yi Shiwen's direct promotion to Apro disciple actually overshadowed everyone. Chapter 205. Accumulation of contacts. Since the shock of Yi Shiwen being promoted to the rank of a true disciple was too strong, so many people didn't pay attention to the promotion of Hua Minghan that happened around the same time. Although both had become the true disciples of Yuan school, but in comparison, Hua Minghan was considerably low-key compared to Yi Shiwen. Therefore, the news of Yi Shiwen stepping into the Truth Realm was much more bizarre since he was merely a new disciple few months ago, whereas Hua Minghan had stayed at the half-step Truth Realm for a long time, so her breakthrough didn't come as a surprise to others. Yi Shiwen, are you really refining a lot of Ling Dan? Noticing the expectant look in her eyes, Yi Shiwen smiled and nodded. Indeed, if you want, then I can send 1,000 Ling Dan for free. Now both Yi Shiwen and Hua Minghan were true disciples. Considering the fact that Yi Shiwen joined late, it should be said that Hua Minghan was his senior, but as the two of them belonged to the same generation of disciples, therefore they called each other without honorifics. All of a sudden, Hua Minghan was extremely surprised as she never expected that Yi Shiwen would just casually talk about gifting 1,000 Ling Dan to her. One must know that it was not a small number when converted into spirit stones. This would be 100,000 top-grade spirit stones. So, how could Yi Shiwen so causally talk about gifting 1,000 Ling Dan to her? The most important thing was that even if experts of Truth 6th stage were torfined for 10 days and nights without eating and drinking, they would still not be able to refine so many Ling Dan. And this figure was equivalent to 1 month's worth of non-stop refining, and that too by an expert of Truth 6th stage. In fact, the sum of 1,000 Ling Dan was an astronomical figure, even for an expert of Truth 6th stage. Especially for experts like Hua Minghan who had recently stepped into the Truth Realm. Even more so, 1,000 Ling Dan were enough for them to practice all the way to the Truth 5th stage without worrying about lack of spirit stones. After successfully crossing the small Truth Realm and reaching the Truth 6th stage, there would be a tremendous change in one's skill and battle strength. One must know that there wasn't just one level difference between 5th and 6th stage of Truth Realm, so there would certainly be a huge difference in consumption rate as well. Although 1,000 Ling Dan were enough to practice all the way to Truth 5th stage, but the experts of Truth 6th stage would actually be able to fully consume this amount in about 2 months. And for the experts of Truth 7th stage or 8th stage, the consumption rate would rise exponentially, then the need for refining Ling Dan would certainly be much more. But this time, Hua Minghan was not at all interested in these 1,000 Ling Dan. After all, her backing was not small. In all her life, she had never lacked practice resources whenever she needed them. She came to meet Yi Shiwen because she was worried about another thing. If you can refine so many Ling Dan, then you must be using some other means of refining, right? Hua Minghan said. Yi Shiwen nodded and did not hide because there was nothing to hide. In fact, there were lots of other ways in which one could refine Ling Dan. For example, one could catch a Truth 6th stage slave and make him spend all his time in refining Ling Danstoff. This was simply a great waste of talent. Or if there were special instruments used, then it was possible to refine them. Everyone knew that since Yi Shiwen was not at Truth 6th stage, then it was impossible for him to refine Lingdan himself. The only possible way of refining so many Lingdan was that he must be using some instrumento do so. But you must have a limited supply of Lingdan, right? Hua Minghan asked. And Yi Shiwen nodded. Of course, the production amount was limited since he was actually relying on Tianyuan mirror to refine Lingdan from the Lingqi present in the atmosphere. But there were other harmful and harmless qi in the air, so the refining process was slow. In the most primitive means of practice, martial artists absorb qi directly from the air into the body, absorb Lingqi and discharge other Yusileski from the body. And Yi Shiwen didn't need to get involved. He was just using Tianyuan mirror to remove impurities and condense only Lingqi in the Lingdan. Tianyuan mirror could independently take care of the refining job. But since only a portion of its strength had recovered, so it was capable of refining a limited amount of 500 Lingdan in a day. However, although it could refine only 500 Lingdan, but this figure was faster than a Truth 7th stage expert's refining speed. Considering Yi Shiwen's current Lingqi consumption rate, 500 Lingdan were still sufficient to meet his needs, but with the constant progress in his cultivation, the consumption rate would also grow exponentially, but with time, the restoration of Tianyuan mirror would also be much more than now. This would make sure that the refining speed would be faster than consumption rate, so at least for a long period of time, Yi Shiwen would not need to worry about lack of Lingqi. And Yi Shiwen was not going to consume so much. Hence he began to think about converting Lingdan to spirit stones. In fact, he was definitely not doing a wonderful thing, but this was still a profitable move. 1 Lingdan could be exchanged for 100 spirit stones. In fact, almost 50 spirit stones could be condensed into a Lingdan when refined. So there was a difference of up to 100% profit. But the most important source of getting Lingdan was Tianyuan mirror, which was not accessible to other experts. But if one needed much more pure and efficient Lingqi, one could get it directly and easily from a Lingdan, which was the reason why they were willing to spend on them. Many people were aware of this fact, but very few people would actually opt to do it because refining Lingdan was really uneconomical when the waste of practice time was taken into consideration. Not to mention, only experts of Truth 6th stage and above could refine them. So the better option was to earn spirit stones by completing tasks and missions from the sect, then use these spirit stones to buy Lingdan. In fact, most of the sources of Lingdan were actually the legendary realm experts or half-step legendary realm masters, since their refining speed was much faster than truth realm masters. I guess you are aware of the restrictions, otherwise, you will end up snatching a core job from the legendary masters. Hua Minghan said. But you are not afraid that so many disciples have come to buy Lingdan from you, and at the end of the day, you will not have enough Lingdan left for yourself? Rest assured, that's totally not a problem. Although it seems like a lot of disciples have gathered for exchanging Lingdan, but most of them are not from the upper ranks. The core disciples only want to buy enough Lingdan to be of help to them in critical life-threatening situations. And in the case of true disciples, they actually have their own reliable means to obtain Lingdan. It indeed caused a great sensation, but I am fully capable of coping up with the situation. Yi Shiwen said. After all, it was not difficult to condense Lingdan, rather the time required for its refining was the main issue, thereby making its cost very high. Lingdan was a very valuable practice resource for true disciples. Perhaps Yi Shiwen was the only one in the entire Yuan school who could dare be so extravagant to openly sell them. After all, Lingdan could be used in a critical moment to momentarily restore Zhenyuan, which would obviously be a contributing factor in saving a life. After reaching the true 6th stage, it was a basic norm for experts to find a balance point between refining Lingdan and practice time. This balance was very necessary, and even Qi Fifan was not an exception to following this standard. Generally, experts preferred saving Lingdan, but Yi Ziwen did not take this seriously. According to Yi Shiwen, as long as he was getting enough spirit stones in exchange, he could continue to have a rapid increase in cultivation. Yi Ziwen dared to maintain such transcendent practice speed due to the underlying causes, but in the eyes of others, it seemed as if he was spending such an enormous wealth in a short time. And the reason for that was that Yi Shiwen understood that strength was the ultimate truth in this world. As long as he possessed enormous strength, astronomical wealth would be waiting for him. Strength was the most fundamental thing in this world. It could question anything and was an answer to all. But then Hua Menghan reminded Yi Shiwen of his original decision of selling Ling Dan. Profit was indeed one of the very important reasons, but the fundamental reason was that he wanted Qinyu faction to accumulate enough contacts. As disciples from all over Yuan school would continue to buy Ling Dan from Qinyu faction, they would inevitably owe favor to him, and also to the entire faction. And favors like this would be repaid by them in the form of helping Qinyu faction in its expansion and development. Although Yi Shiwen had been relentlessly taking lives, but there was a truth he knew very well, that no one could be an enemy of everyone. People must have friends to watch their backs in critical times. And this exchange of Ling Dan was such a good opportunity to accumulate contacts. Not to forget, the word of mouth would also benefit Qinyu faction's reputation and status. After all, Qinyu faction might seem massive at first sight, but Yi Shiwen knew that it was just because he was promoted to the rank of a pro-disciple. However, in reality, Qinyu faction couldn't possibly compete with the factions of true disciples. In fact, at present, Qinyu faction's strength was equivalent to that of mid-level factions, because really powerful factions at least had more than 2 true disciples. Chapter 206. True disciple joins. Precisely because of this, Yi Shiwen had a sense of crisis and urgency, because time waits for no one. Not to mention, there was a large gap between the strength of Qinyu faction and the factions of other pro-disciples, or even true disciples of Truth's 7th, 8th and 9th stage. Now Yi Shiwen felt that he had become a bit high profile. If he was alone, then others would naturally not care anyway, but now, since he was representing Qinyu faction, then most likely several forces would try to suppress its development. Yi Shiwen's intention was to accumulate as many connections for Qinyu faction as he could. In case of infinite redemption, it would certainly attract the attention of some super experts, but at that time, they wouldn't face an unfavorable situation pertaining to the development of Qinyu faction thanks to the sheer amount of accumulated contacts. Thank you for reminding me. Yi Shiwen said, from tomorrow onwards, Qinyu faction will start selling only 30 Ling Dan per day. This amount was less than 1/10 of Tianyuan mirrors per day refining capacity, so it was simply not a problem. Hua Menghan smiled at Yi Shiwen. He was really smart, and soon realized the meaning of her words. After all, the small amount of 30 Ling Dan won't attract too much attention. Of course, he would continue to produce large number of Ling Dan, but Qinyu faction would use them to redeem faction credits. This system was just like the system of redeeming sect credits. These rules were decided after Yi Shiwen had a consultation with Yi Feng and other high-level officials of Qinyu faction. But news about Yi Shiwen's decision set off a firestorm in Yuan school. 30 Ling Dan were not much, especially with the huge demand in the sect, but in general, they were selling 30 per day, which was 900 per month. Going on like this, they would be selling thousands in a year. Suddenly, countless disciples raged up and rushed straight towards Qinyu Peak. But the requirements were very simple. Each person must take a number plate and stand in the queue. Each and everyone must show their number plate at the time of buying Ling Dan, otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to buy irrespective of the money they might offer. For a time, let alone Ling Dan, even those number plates had their price pushed up because of increased demand and lessened supply. But since Yi Shiwen had said that this was going to be a long-term exchange, so he would gradually increase the amount of Ling Dan as well. Although right now, he was providing only a small number, but he already managed to appease the hearts of many people. Otherwise, perhaps riots would have been unavoidable in such a situation. It was not a difficult task for Yi Shiwen. Just this month, Yi Shiwen refined more than 15,000 immortality pills, which was sufficient to meet the requirements for more than 1 year. And with time, his refining efficiency would continue to increase. And with Tianyuan mirror's further restoration, the refining speed would increase as well. Although only a month's time had passed, but Yi Shiwen exhibited powerful and magical means that people had never seen before. That's why, there were more and more people who wanted to come under his wings. Even if his strength was not as good as the strength of other pro-disciples, but also not too inferior. And if they joined his faction now, he would certainly not ill-treat them in the future. Yi Shiwen finally made his move, and it even attracted the attention of many true disciples. Apart from creating their own faction, true disciples also tend to join other factions. In fact, there were more than half who had not yet joined any faction and preferred being aloof. But whether it was a true disciple or core disciple, both faced a very important issue of lack of Lingqi for practice. Certainly, Yi Shiwen had no shortage of Lingqi at this point, but most true disciples did. And because of lack of Lingqi, their practice speed was always slow. Even though some of them were considered true geniuses, but there was a huge gap between them and a pro-disciple like Qi Fifan. And this gap could be narrowed if they had sufficient Lingqi for faster practice speed. Not being able to progress quickly brought upon another problem, and that was shortage of life. Although after breaking through to the truth realm, one could attain a lifespan of 500 years, but difficulty in breakthrough also increased exponentially with each stage. It was simply hard to imagine how tough it was to have a breakthrough in truth realm. In fact, it was actually much easier to reach from Hotian realm to truth realm. And only with rapid progress, they could reach the truth 6th stage, and that would add extra 200 years to their lifespan. Then they would have enough time to think of ways of breaking into the legendary realm, and attain the lifespan of millennium. For them, the desire for a breakthrough was far more than most people could ever imagine. Many true disciples took aim at Yi Shiwen, after all, although he was giving out dozens of Ling Dan daily. But no one was willing to believe that Yi Shiwen was capable of producing only this much. Yi Shiwen's refining capacity should certainly be far more than this number, because they couldn't possibly not see how members of Qinyu faction were allowed to redeem faction credits as Ling Dan. If they had joined Qinyu faction in the past, then with their truth level strength, they would certainly have enjoyed much more benefits compared to the average disciples. They could easily perform several tasks for the faction, and exchange faction credits for Ling Dan. This was just having a stable income. And even if Yi Shiwen was not at Truth 6th stage, he was able to refine so many Ling Dan, so when he would step into Truth 6th stage, one could simply not imagine the number of Ling Dan he would refine in a day. Senior Yi, I sincerely want to join Qinyu faction. I hope you will give me shelter over here. At this time, the first true disciple finally appeared to join Qinyu faction. It was a middle-aged man dressed in old-fashioned robe, and his name was Yi Zhenren. Among all of the true disciples of Yi Yuan school, he was one of the oldest. He became a true disciple almost 200 years ago, and it could be said that status-wise, he was senior even to Chu Jingkai and other peerless experts of his generation. But right now he called Yi Shiwen as Senior Yi. Of course, it was true that Yi Shiwen was now a pro-disciple, and theoretically, he was supposed to be senior in rank to all other true disciples. Now he was on equal footing with only the other 4 pro-disciples. Yi Shiwen thought for a moment and instantly saw through his purpose of coming to him. Those weren't empty words, because he really spoke up his mind. He actually wanted to join Qinyu faction, and his main motivation for making this decision was to obtain Ling Dan. He was already more than 300 years old, and was only at the 4th stage of Truth Realm, so basically he could be counted among the old experts, and in the coming few decades he would turn into an elder of the sect. Although true disciples and elders shared some of the parts, but there was a big inherent difference between them. But Yi Zhenren didn't want to just stay on the 4th stage of Truth Realm, and then turn into an elder. He wanted to break through to the 6th stage of Truth Realm, and continue to stay as a true disciple. He could not achieve it on his own, but Yi Shiwen could. Yi Shiwen was an outstanding existence who was appointed as the 5th pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school at such a young age. In the future, he might actually be much more successful than the legendary expert, Qi Fifan. So, if he chose to follow Yi Shiwen in the future, he might be able to have a breakthrough, reaching 6th stage of Truth Realm, or even above that. Basically, only a small breakthrough to the small Truth Realm, and then to the Truth 6th stage could raise his status among the true disciples and bring him respect and prosperity that several other true disciples were unable to achieve. Then, he would be counted among few senior true disciples who were able to step into Truth 6th stage, which was considered extremely hard to achieve. Well, as long as you are sincerely to join, Qinyu faction will gladly welcome you, and you will never be ill-treated in the future. And for you, breaking through to the 6th stage will be something just around the corner. Yi Shiwen said with a loud laughter. Yi Zhenren was the first true disciple who willingly came to join the faction, so they would certainly not ill-treat him. Not to mention, as long as a refuge true disciple was willing to help in the growth of Qianyu faction, there was no point in ill-treating him. Although Yi Shiwen was not the leader of Qianyu faction, but in reality, he was actually its spiritual leader. So it could be said that if he gave his word to someone, it would become a law for the whole faction to follow. And just now, he gave his word to Yi Zhenren. Yi Zhenren joined Qianyu faction. This news quickly spread throughout Yiyuan school. The leaders of other forces sighed. After all, Qianyu faction was expanding quite fast, and that too right in front of their eyes. Chapter 207. To the Imperial City. But Yi Zaiwen did not have much time to deal with the matters of Qianyu faction. So he decided to leave all these matters mainly to Yan Qiling and others to deal with. After all, Yi Zaiwen was just a titular elder, though he was actually the lord of the court and most influential character in the entire faction. But he did not want to get involved in the management of too many chores. And now that Yi Zhenren had come to seek refuge in Qianyu faction, he got the position of law enforcement elder of the faction. Now he was like the direct descendant of Qianyu faction since he had never been a part of any faction. And even if no other true disciple would come to join, he would be staying in Qianyu faction for a very long time. In fact, keeping Yi Zaiwen aside, now he was the strongest member and final line of defense of Qianyu faction. Yi Zaiwen did not make him wait long, and immediately rewarded him with 100 Ling Dan. Yi Zhenren was suddenly very excited because this amount was already much more than what he was able to obtain in the past several years. Yi Zaiwen did not hesitate anymore, and began closed-door practice. Although the sect head himself came forward to announce that he would ensure Yi Shiwen's safety and security, and definitely wouldn't allow the 8th prince to have his way. If their battle was to be scheduled about a decade later, then even if Yi Zaiwen was to die, the sect head wouldn't interfere. But at present, the scenario was entirely different. Not to forget, this was not the first time Theta Peerless Genius was being targeted, as the 5 forces had always been this way. Each time there was a rise of a Peerless Genius, the other forces would send their own to fight each other, and eradicate any potential future threat. Who wouldn't know about the legendary lore about the rise of Qi Fifan in Yiyuan school? But a sect absolutely wouldn't allow its distinguished disciples to die in unfair battles. It would be a seriously the sect's arsenal. But in turn, they might send Qi Fifan to strike the 8th prince. However, that's another case that the royal clan would immediately come hopping to save their own. Yi Zaiwen had not yet begun the closed-door training. Weena task came out of nowhere. After several months of preparation, the royal clan seemed all prepared to organize a large force which would be tasked to destroy the ever-sporadic Bimojia strongholds throughout the Great Yu State. The largest force that the Great Yu State had ever seen finally began to reveal its fang. It was a result of 100 years of accumulation, which finally began to come out. For a major force like Yiyuan school, 100 years was almost like a generation's time to grow. But one could imagine that this accumulated strength, and that too in a span of 100 years, was going to be scary. All of the secret legions were about to reveal their true strength. They were going to rush throughout the country and eliminate Baimajiao. Now, even the royal clan couldn't help but use its full strength to wipe out the Baimojia forces. However, Yiyuan school could not possibly rely on other forces. To destroy Baimajiao, the ordinary legions would just act as cannon fodder. They would certainly play the part of warrior regiments. The royal clan had helped in the production and development of these legions for so many years, and finally, they were all forthcoming for a collective action. This time, the 4 major sects got the invitation from the royal clan, inviting them with the request to send the most elite experts to take part in the expedition against Baimajiao. It basically meant that the 4 forces needed to dispatch truth-level experts because in general, sending Xiantian-level experts wouldn't have much impact on the strengthening of legions. Since there were already many Xiantian-level experts in Therayaoklan, but it lacked truth-level experts, particularly now when they wanted to suppress Baimojia throughout the Great Yu State. Being a pro-disciple, Yi Ziwen also received the task to go to the imperial city as a pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school. And not just him, even Qi Fifan also received the same task. Out of the 5 pro-disciples, Chu Jingkai was busy training in the deep space of Yi Yuan school, whereas both Huang Luochen and Shui Yanluo were out on campaign, so this time, only Qi Fifan and Yi Shiwen were tasked to go to Imperial City. Also taking into account that this was not the first collaboration between the two, so sending them together was justified. Although Yi Ziwen's strength was not enough, but as long as he had the identity of the pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school, no one would dare to not listen to him. But Yi Ziwen and Qi Fifan didn't go together. He had some matter to deal with in Qianyu faction, so Qi Fifan took a group of people with him and left early. Imperial capital? According to the rumors, it is considered the liveliest and most prosperous area in the entire Great Yu state. Regardless of day and night, the whole city is lightened with endless lit colored lamps, making it seem like there's day all the time. Yi Ziwen remembered the description of the imperial city that he had read before in books, but he had never gone there in person. Certainly, this was just the impression of ordinary people. However, it was indeed true that imperial capital was the supreme headquarter of the royal clan, comprising of many experts like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and several others famous ones. Although no one dared to point at them, but everyone knew about them. In fact, there were rumors that some devil experts were also hidden in the imperial city. The entire imperial city could be considered as Great Yu State's most prosperous city with the resident population of over 20 million. When not considering the floating population, Yi Ziwen found Yi Feng and handed over almost 15,000 Lingdan to him. Anyway, for Yi Shiwen, as long as he desired, he could obtain as many as he needed. He could obtain a steady stream of Lingdan from Tianyuan Mirror, so at the moment, these Lingdan weren't so valuable for him. It could be said that right now, great wealth was right at his fingertips. Brother, you are going to the imperial capital. Be careful there, that place the stronghold of the royal clan. Yi Feng said with some concern for Yi Shiwen. There are numerous experts of royal clan in the imperial capital, such as Hairy Ox, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Let alone a lot of people have come to hate you because of 8th Prince's matter. So you must be extremely careful. Rest assured, brother, I will be fine. Yi Ziwen smiled and said, if someone tries to target me, I won't hold back either. Yi Ziwen flatly said, but his words were full of killing intention. If he were to kill the 8th Prince in Imperial City, the royal clan won't tolerate it. But Yi Shiwen was certainly not a scapegoat because he had the backing of Yi Yuan School, one of the 5 major forces of Great Yu State. Even the royal clan couldn't dare to offend such an enormous beast. Yi Ziwen did not wait long, and left for imperial capital the very next day. Qi Fifan left for the same. He opened his devil wings and flew towards the imperial city, darting all the way. In just a span of one day and night, he arrived at the periphery of the imperial city wall, retracted the devil wings and descended near the city gate. The imperial city was just like Yi Yuan School. There were numerous no-fly zones over the entire city. There was a circle of protection hanging directly over the city, but on the inside, there were no hard and fast rules. When going through the city gate, the city looked so large that it was simply hard to imagine its vastness. The city wall stretched thousands of li from east to west. Even in the previous world, Yi Ziwen had not seen such a huge city. The perimeter of the city wall stretched up to 1,000 li, and was about 10 li in width. There was literally no way one could see the terminus of this city. Yi Ziwen looked around and found the entire city filled with Xiantian masters. Xiantian-level experts were present simple everywhere. Even on walls, patrol soldiers were actually Xiantian powerhouses. Moreover, not just ordinary powerhouse, their cultivations were very deep. Looking from afar, it seemed as if bloody Xiantian qi was shooting round after round up into the sky. If not considering that it was the imperial capital of Great Yu State, it would have been a terrifying sight to withhold. Looking ahead, even pedestrians on the road possessed high cultivation levels. There were Xiantian masters everywhere, and Yi Shiwen could occasionally sense some truth-level experts from time to time. And sometimes he could sense the surge of terrifying aura from the depths of the palace. This was simply a terrible and dangerous spot. exceptionally horrifying, really worthy of being a royal stronghold. Flying was not prohibited inside, so long as one didn't go near the city wall. Only a small number of experts were flying near the city wall. And they too probably belonged to the royal clan. Because if a person didn't belong to the royal clan, and he tried to fly near the city wall, then that would trigger the enchantment and shoot him down. The royal clan certainly had a special way to face this enchantment. As he went inside, he had a vague feeling about the pressure of this enchantment. No one knew exactly when the Great Yu state was founded, probably some 1,000 years ago, so it could be considered that this enchantment was set up back then, and had been reinforced multiple times to last this long. In fact, it was so strong that even if a truth-level expert tried to face it head-on, he would still have a fearful feeling in his heart while facing it. Therefore, even if there were lots of experts in the city, but no one dared to fly near the city wall. Yi Zaiwen entered the imperial city, and the first thing he needed to do was to find the place where his fellow disciples of Yiyuan School were residing, but it was not difficult, after all. Yiyuan School was one of the 4 major sects, so the place where they had settled would naturally be famous and widely known. Yi Zaiwen was walking on a wide avenue, although it was the sidewalk, but was wide enough to accommodate 2 carriages at once. The street was crowded with people, and the eyesight of these residents was very sharp. Although Yi Zaiwen was deliberately restraining his cultivation, but they were still able to recognize that he was a truth-level disciple, despite his commoner-like appearance. He is a truth-level master, absolutely yes. Look, as he is walking, the air surrounding him is also changing, which is a symbol of a truth-level expert. Yes, you are right, and this is not the usual calm aura of a truth-level disciple who has recently stepped into the truth realm. Look at his armband, he is a disciple of Yiyuan School. Well, Yiyuan School is really worthy of being one of the 4 major sects, one mighty expert after another. Indeed, yesterday itself a team of experts arrived from Yiyuan School. Didn't you sense that mighty aura? It reportedly belongs to the leader of that team, who is actually one of the 5 pro-disciple of Yiyuan School. He is called Qi Fifan. When he was young, he once came to the imperial city and picked fights with the experts all over the city, and that power and prestige he showed back then was truly mesmerizing. But they say that Yiyuan School has sent 2 pro-disciples. Did you see the second one? Chapter 208, 9th Prince Yulin. But they say that Yiyuan School has sent 2 pro-disciples. Did you see the second one? I did not see. Reportedly he did not come together with Qi Fifan, but since you mentioned him, I tell you there's a true story about this guy. What is it? Let us hear as well. This pro-disciple is actually the same guy who was challenged to a duel by our 8th prince. This guy is much undisciplined and out of control. He is only 20 years old, but actually beheaded the commander of Imperial Guards. It really shocked the entire nation. What, Feng Kong was killed by him? Then he must really be a fierce guy. When the 8th prince would come back from the ruins, I'm afraid he would burn with rage. The 8th prince would certainly not let him off. After all, Feng Kong used to be his most capable assistant. No way. Yiyuan School's head has personally come forward to grant full protection to this guy, so how would the 8th prince lay his hands on him? It is said that this guy is very young, and if this duel was to be scheduled 10 years from now, then maybe he would be able to compete with the 8th prince. This Yiyuan School really has an abundance of talented individuals. Earlier, it was Qi Fifan, and now they have Yi Shiwen as well. The heaven really prefers that sect. This is nothing. Tell me which forces don't have 1 or 2 geniuses like that. Even if Yi Shiwen can contend with the 8th prince, but he can only contend, he cannot win at any cost. Indeed, after all, legendary characters like Qi Fifan appear only once in decades. The pedestrians were whooping among themselves on the street, but Yi Shiwen didn't actually care. Their talks couldn't have the slightest effect on his state of mind, since his state of mind had already been practiced to the rock-solid state. Hence he was usually always calm, composed and focused on his objectives. However, Yi Shiwen wasn't actually in a hurry to meet up with Qi Fifan and the others. It's been a long time since he arrived in this world, and after so long, he once again got the chance to aimlessly wander about in a fairly developed city. The streets, markets and crowds soon reminded him of his past life. giving him a feeling that he was back on the earth. But this was not the previous world. The customs here were very different, and so were the people walking on the road. Basically, each and every one of them possessed power in their bodies, although not all of them were formidable. There were also some who were at the 5th or 6th stage of Hotian realm. The city and its residents themselves were the source behind the legions, and with such a strong foundation, no wonder these legions were so formidable. Along the way, he saw a variety of shops that looked magnificent. These shops had this abnormal atmosphere around them which made them seem even more grandiose. In fact, they were even more magnificent than some of the mansions for aristocrats. And everywhere, the houses were very tall, stretching all the way up to 10 floors or even more. These houses had the general structure of wooden houses, but weren't made up of wood. A special kind of willow tree wood was used to construct them, and its strength was almost comparable to that of steel. Yi Shiwen knew that these stores didn't deal with ordinary individuals. They only welcomed powerful warriors or rich people who held valuable things to exchange. Not just that, these stores only accepted Lingdan as currency. And right now, the number of Lingdan in his possession could neither be considered more nor less. In fact, even an amount of 500 Lingdan could not be considered much in imperial markets. Yi Shiwen did not delay any more. He asked a local resident about the location of Yi Yuan School's courtyard and quickly arrived there. It was a magnificent courtyard, and seemed to be made up of gold and jade. It was currently the residence of the team which arrived from Yi Yuan School, and also the permanent place of stay for Yi Yuan School's delegates. Brother Yi is here. Brother Yi. Brother Yi. As Yi Shiwen arrived, the sharp-eyed disciples recognized him immediately and greeted him respectfully. Yi Shiwen did not stay long with them, and soon found Qi Fifan. Brother Qi, sorry for being late. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and said, No big deal, you are not late for the task. Qi Fifan smiled and said, I presume this is the first time young Yi has visited the imperial capital. How about you go out on a stroll? No, I would prefer getting down to business matters. Yi Shiwen shook his head. He had seen far too many metropolitans in his past life, and even in this world, it was almost nothing more than a little bit difference in customs and thought process. Good, a while ago, the royal clan briefed us about the task. Basically, the truth-level experts are supposed to destroy the Bai Majiao strongholds, which are scattered throughout the Great Yu state. Qi Fifan frowned and said, But this time, the situation is quite stern. That's why the royal clan has invited strong experts to go into action. The day after tomorrow we will split off. I hope you are prepared. As far as the 8th prince's matter is concerned, I'm afraid there are some experts from royal clan who are very dissatisfied with you. Qi Fifan said, If they dare to cause trouble for me, I won't hold back either and behead them all if required. But in this crucial time, shouldn't royal clan try to restrict the needless actions of its members? Yi Shiwen indifferently said. After talking for a while, both Yi Shiwen and Qi Fifan got busy in preparing for the task, which was scheduled to start the day after tomorrow. Yi Shiwen went down to prepare in his private small courtyard. Just when he was about to start practicing, the voice of a disciple caught his attention. Brother Yi, Great Yu's 9th prince has come to visit you. Yi Shiwen frowned, confused about what the 9th prince wanted from him. Anyway, because of the 8th prince's matter, several members of royal clan didn't hold goodwill for him. And now, the 9th prince suddenly appeared out of nowhere to visit him. But for what? Send him inside. Yi Shiwen said and thought, since the 9th prince had come in person, shutting him out wouldn't be fair. In a few moments, 2 figures appeared outside the courtyard. One of which was a handsome youth with dignified appearance who appeared to be 20 years old, and clad in a royal-looking bright yellow dragon robe. Behind him was an old man in black clothes who was slavishly following the young man. Seeing Yi Shiwen, the man clad in dragon robe stepped forward, cupped his hands and said, You must be Brother Yi. I am the 9th imperial prince of Great Yu state, named Yulin. Yulin cupped his hands to show respect to Yi Shiwen even though he came from royal background. After all, in this world, strength was the supreme law. Being a truth-level expert, Yi Shiwen commanded enough respect and 9th prince showed proper etiquette by greeting him this way. especially because both of them belonged to the same generation of experts. Nice to meet you, ninth prince. Yi Shiwen also greeted him respectfully. Considering Yi Ziwen's values, if the other party was being polite, then there was no need to give them a cold shoulder. I am not aware of ninth prince's reason for this sudden visit. Yi Shiwen straightforwardly jumped to the main issue. It seems like Brother Yi is also a straightforward person like me. I see, I will not beat around the bush. Yulin smiled and said, frankly speaking, I have come here hoping to form an alliance with Brother Yi. To form an alliance? Yi Shiwen was surprised all of a sudden, then looked curiously at the ninth prince, smiled and said, Your Highness seems mistaken about something. Why would he think about forming an alliance with me? Of course there is one reason behind this. For example, what if I say it's the 8th imperial brother? The ninth prince faintly smiled and said. As he mentioned the 8th prince, Yi Ziwen's pupils immediately contracted. He then smiled and said, The 8th prince, how exactly? Yi Shiwen actually began to think crazily, extracting points and facts from the news he had been obtaining lately. There were about a dozen princes in Great Yu State, and at least 4/5 of them were already all grown up. All of them were ambitious, outstanding, talented, and considered one of the best in their generation, capable enough to mount the throne as the emperor of Great Yu State. But it was not at all surprising since they had obtained the most elite education. But the biggest problem was that there was only one throne and only one person could mount it. And among these princes, few were exceptionally powerful and influential. The eldest prince, the second prince, the fourth prince, and the 8th prince, these 4 were by far considered the most powerful candidates for the throne. They were not just powerful, they also had people's support, and they had also accumulated support from several peerless experts. But the most recent eye-catching prince among them was the 8th prince, because looking at the rate his strength was enhancing lately, he would most likely step into the legendary realm, and might become the legendary emperor, and that too after the gap of several generations. Although during the imperial power struggle, personal strength was not the most important thing, but it was still a considerably important factor in deciding the victor. And Yi Shiwen was most concerned about this because with respect to these 4 strongest princes, the 9th prince was definitely not one of the most dazzling princes left in the competition. In fact, a lot of people didn't even know that he existed. It could be said that he was relatively low-key, but there was a possibility that this was because Yi Shiwen was not too concerned about the royal clan and its affairs. But the news about several other princes usually reached Yiyuan school as rumors. After all, Great Yu State was under the rule of royal clan. Although they lived in peace for thousands of years, but who could possibly predict the next emperor's character? What if a madman was to ascend the throne and decided to go to war with them? Not to forget, it was possible for any of the princes to ascend the throne. So Yiyuan school used to obtain specific information about royal clan's affairs. In fact, they had stationed a special person in charge of studying these princes, and whenever they pointed out a prince who was relatively on unfriendly terms with Yiyuan school, they would either get rid of him, or at least make them lose the throne. Also, this was not just the case for Yiyuan school. Even other major sects also followed the same line of politics. But, even on the research files of Yiyuan school, the name of the 9th prince was nowhere to be seen, which proved how low-key he really was. However, today, it seemed like something was different about him. Brother Yi, do you really want me to state it? The 9th prince said with a smile. The news about your duel with the 8th imperial brother had already spread throughout the Great Yu State. Chapter 209, Alliance. So what? Yi Shiwen said. I know that your sect's head has announced that he will protect you, but considering my 8th imperial brother's character, he will not give up so easily. The 9th prince further said. Actually, we have a common enemy. Enemy? The word just slipped out of his mouth, as he continued to ponder. It seemed like in the research files of Yiyuan school, at least the information about the 9th prince was certainly missing. Yiyuan school certainly had an unpleasant impression of the 8th prince. And the reason was very simple, because the 8th prince was very ambitious. He basically wanted to control all of the 4 major sects on his fingertips. Even so, it doesn't seem like we have anything to cooperate on. Or do you think you can stop your 8th imperial brother? Yi Shiwen asked. It should be said that it's about mutual help and mutual cooperation. I know that you are a pro-disciple of Yi Yuan school and sooner and later, you are going to have a thriving future, and that is the basis of our cooperation. The 9th prince lightly said. Apparently he was a very proud fellow, and usually didn't prefer paying much attention to ordinary people. You help me ascend the throne, and after I mount the throne, I will use my royal power to help you mount the position of Yi Yuan school's head. The 9th prince indifferently said, but the way he said it was quite direct and straightforward. I am different from my 8th imperial brother. I am not as ambitious as him, and neither do I dream of putting the complete control of Great Yu State into the hands of royal clan. The 9th prince said. It was not as if he was resentful against the 8th prince. It was just difficult for him to accept the 8th prince's ambition of dominating the 4 major sections. Even if the 8th prince is out of question, I can still choose from a lot of other princes. Yi Shiwen said after all, he knew that there were about a dozen princes in the empire, not to forget the eldest prince, the 2nd prince and the 4th prince. Now the eldest imperial brother, the 2nd imperial brother and the 4th imperial brother, have formed an alliance with Chu Jinkai, a pro-disciple of your Yi Yuan school. The 9th prince said. And as far as the remaining imperial brothers are concerned, I assure you that none of them is stronger than me. I should be by far the most suitable partner for Brother Yi. The 9th prince confidently said. It's the right choice for both of us. Both of them held equivalent levels of potential. Yi Shiwen had recently emerged, and was being compared to a legend like Qi Fifan, but he still had a very long way to go to become his rival. And the 9th prince also had tremendous potential, but he was still in his dormant period. However, he was still an ambitious dragon. Yi Shiwen, this 9th prince is not an ordinary guy. Yi Mo said. He not much older than you, but his cultivation has already reached the 4th stage of Truth Realm, and I can see that he holds strong talent. I'm afraid I don't see much difference in his potential and that of the so-called 8th prince. After listening to the words of Yi Mo, Yi Shiwen considered for a moment. This 9th prince so confidently came to him, and that too not without reason, although it was certainly a complementary cooperation of the two. But Yi Shiwen didn't have the interest in the sect head's position, still he would certainly having some powerful connections, so in the end, it was a good choice. Such being the case, I would respectfully do what you say, but always remember, deference is no substitute for obedience. Yi Shiwen spilled out a strange smile and said. Suddenly, there was a look of pleasant surprise on the face of the 9th prince. The kind of shocked expression he had on his face right now was actually a rare sight. Finally, a big rock fell off the heart of the 9th prince. In fact, today he came to meet Yi Shiwen but didn't have any grasp over the situation. In addition to that, Yi Shiwen might have opted to help other princes since he was relatively low-key when compared to his other imperial brothers. Not to forget, Yi Shiwen recently became the pro-disciple, and was known as the next Qi Fifan of Yi Yuan school, so there was no need for him to be in a hurry to make a decision. In comparison, Yi Shiwen was a greater figure than him, considering both status and popularity. That's why when Yi Shiwen nodded, he could not help but feel a big stone falling off his heart. So long as Brother Yi agrees, it's all good. Today, I will go back to the castle and make a request from Father Emperor, so that Brother Yi gets transferred to my legion. The 9th prince suddenly said in a lofty manner. This will be my first time commanding troops in battle, and I can only finish the battle in one fell swoop in a majestic manner. Then only it will lay my position in the eyes of Father Emperor. You see, in this battle we can only win, we don't have the luxury of losing, so Brother Yi must also win in a grand way. Yi Shiwen nodded. It seemed like the 9th prince didn't intend to continue to stay dormant. But again, if he actually planned to stay dormant for some more time, then at the time of choosing the emperor for the throne, he would have no chance against the 4 strongest princes. Now these princes needed opportunities to show their valiance and courage. They must succeed in a short time, just the way the 8th prince did it. And they only had one way left to do that. They must courageously march forward, destroying all the obstacles and enemies in their way, constantly winning and rising towards the final goal. Yi Shiwen nodded, Since he had already made the decision to help the ninth prince, he would certainly help to the very end. "Where is your legion going the day after tomorrow?" Yi Shiwen asked. "To the Haishui's lair in the East China Sea. That Haishui is really very audacious. He dared to join hands with the devil. When we reach there, we have been tasked to slaughter all of the deep-water black snakes. None of those beasts shall be left alive," the ninth prince said with an irrepressible excitement, which was quite understandable since he was going to be the leader of his own legion for the first time. And if he did not succeed, then this might end up being the last time. The power struggle for throne was a very nasty game. In fact, many princes did not get a chance to show their strength. Those who managed to show their potential would get only one chance to prove themselves. Otherwise they would get eliminated. But Haishui's lair is the residing place of half-step legendary level demon beast. At my current level, I cannot deal with him, Yi Shiwen said, since the Deepwater Black Serpent King had left a very deep impression on him last time. Rest assured, naturally the royal clan will take care of that beast, the ninth prince said as he really valued Yi Ziwen's life, considering he knew that Yi Shiwen was not yet a grown-up and had limitless future. That's no problem, Yi Shiwen nodded. Chapter 210 Destruction of Haishui's lair. The royal clan moved very quickly. There wasn't the so-called hauling or procrastination. The entire huge state apparatus began to move up, and in the face of such a thing, it seemed as if it was advancing to subvert the rule of this country. The mobilization speed of Yu Imperial clan went far beyond the imagination of Yi Shiwen. At this time, this was a display of the true strength of this legendary bureaucracy, which was driving hundreds of thousands into actions at the same time. Early in the morning, one after another, several teams finally began to reveal their fangs. They were advancing towards the respective city gates of the Imperial City in order to march out of the city. Hundreds of thousands of experts were marching together, which suddenly shocked the whole city. However, the citizens were not at all afraid. Due to the abrupt surfacing of Bai Majiao, there had been turmoil for several months, and everyone was aware of that. Although Bai Majiao had not dared to be dissolute in the imperial capital, but they truly did some serious damage to the Great Yu state. Yi Shiwen was flying at a very high altitude in the sky, and watching how the combative armies were marching out of the imperial gates. He was now fully aware of the fact that Great Yu state contained astonishing strength, which was finally unveiled in front of his eyes. The fearful power of several legions was finally unleashed and fully emerged. The murderous aura swept off throughout the sky, and the clouds seemed to have been minced. One simply didn't stand a chance when facing such an army, unless he was a legendary level expert. Soon, Yi Ziwen's wait for his own team was over when he saw the special regiment of Imperial Armed Forces marching forward with the Great Tiger's flag fluttering on the forefront. The Imperial soldiers were mostly the experts of Xiantian realm, and the higher-rank commanders were experts of Xiantian 6th stage or above. The particularity of Great Yu's royal clan was that they didn't have too many top players unlike other major sects, but they housed far too many experts of Xiantian realm, and the sheer number far surpassed any of the major sections. Yesterday the ninth prince was clad in a royal dragon robe, but today he was wearing a military uniform, which was giving him a heroic aura. As usual, the old man in black clothes was following him and sticking close behind him. The old man's cultivation was only faintly discernible, and his skill seemed very profound. A huge fleet of battleships appeared on the ground, stationed about 10 li outside the imperial city wall. The imperial soldiers marched towards these battleships and boarded them. Dozens of warships soon took off together. These battleships were actually the divine tools. Their might was simply infinite, and were completely different from the warships used by the Great Yu state during national campaigns and ordinary expeditions. Yi Shiwen also flew down and landed on a warship which was being led by the high-spirited ninth prince. "Brother Yi, this is the beginning of our great cause," the ninth prince said in a somewhat complacent manner. Yi Shiwen did not speak, however. A faint smile appeared on his face. One after another, battleships turned into dazzling streamers of light and flew far towards the horizon. In just half day's time, these battleships reached the East China Sea and descended on the seawater. However, even in the sea, These battleships were scary fast and charging around violently. There literally was nothing to stop these ships. And the demon beasts that mistakenly came in their path were crushed miserably, and simply turned into small bits of flesh and blood splatter. Soon, they arrived in the waters around Haishui's lair. Begin extermination and clean up each and every living thing in this and the nearby areas. I want it completely cleaned up. Don't forget to wipe out all the demon beasts here. Not even a shrimp must be left alive. I want this place to turn into Haishui's graveyard. The ninth prince roared while he was brimming with killing intention. As you command, my lord. The might of thousands of imperial soldiers manifested rapidly. The demon beasts of Haishui's lair couldn't possibly be the match of an organized and trained army. Not to forget the imperial army consisted of Xiantian-level soldiers and several truth-level commanders. Suddenly, the whole sea turned bloody and chaotic. One could hear the pitiful roars and screams of demon beasts, transmitting straight from the sea. After having swept clean the demon beasts on the sea level, the Imperial Corps proceeded to gradually dive into the sea. The soldiers were equipped with proper underwater equipments to enable breathing inside the sea, so that slaughtering demon beasts in the depths of the sea would be no problem at all. Yi Shiwen sighed with emotion, and thought that the royal clan was filthy rich, and to the extent that the other sects simply didn't stand a chance in front of its wealth. Who dares to massacre my subjects? A loud roar rang out from the depths of seabed. An about 10,000 feet long deepwater black snake king instantly jumped out of the seabed with its mouth open, which suddenly sucked in dozens of imperial soldiers who were swallowed whole in one breath and were eaten raw. At this moment, the deepwater black snake king's great roar terribly shook everyone's eardrums. This one roar was equivalent to the sound produced by 1,000 big drums. One swing from his huge and powerful tail shook the entire sea. But Yi Shiwen clearly saw a massive wound on his tail which once again cracked open, along with splashes of blood spreading in the seawater, when he swung his tail. Apparently, this was an injury that he received during the previous fight, and it still hadn't healed. Hey Shui, how dare you collaborate with those devils today? In the name of imperial decree, I must exterminate you and all these evildoers. The ninth prince stepped forward and shouted to clear the way. Today, this Haishui's lair will be destroyed, and it will be completely removed from the East China Sea. Kill! The soldiers of Imperial Guard Armed Forces roared, and the murderous aura of the deadliest of soldiers immediately upset the seawater. It was really an incomparably fearful sight. At this time, there a hint of regret on the face of Deepwater Black Snake King. He had been thoroughly misled by Lu Hongwei, so the regret was much self-explanatory in this situation. Evildoer, today is the day you die. At this time, the old man in black clothes instantly flew up, and a terrifying aura spread out in all directions. Despite having a skinny body, his presence was just like that of a mountain. The chi exploded out of his body and spread out in the surrounding radius of several thousand miles. Half-step legendary master. Yi Shiwen gawked for a moment, because he never expected that the skinny old man, who always followed around the ninth prince and never left his side, would turn out to be a half-step legendary expert. He finally understood the hidden meaning behind the ninth prince's words when he said that the royal clan would deal with the beast, so the ninth prince was secretly talking about the black-clothed old man. By quietly roping in a half-step legendary expert into his faction, it could be seen that the ninth prince was really aiming for the throne. He had secretly done no small preparation for this. Who are you? The Deepwater Black Snake roared fiercely when he saw a half-step legendary expert standing in his way. If he was not injured, then dealing with a half-step legendary expert would have been no trouble for him. But right now, he was in a dire situation, and he could sense that he was facing a terrifying expert. I am the one who is going to end your life. The black-clothed old man indifferently said. You should know that the devil invasion is close. Do you want to go against the heaven's will? The Deepwater Black Snake exclaimed. A lowly beast like you dares to teach me? The black-clothed old man disdainfully said. The old man's palm gradually turned blood-red, and the surrounding water instantly evaporated. Yi Shiwen could not help but gasp. This technique was extremely frightening. This old man was clearly much stronger than an expert of half-step legendary level. Die. The old man moved up instantly, and it appeared like his physique suddenly turned into a water sword and rushed straight towards the deep-water Black Snake King. A gigantic hand congealed out of nowhere and grabbed the beast into its grasp. And right then, it appeared as if an endless scarlet hell evolved instantaneously and crashed right into the body of the deep-water Black Snake King. Great blood handprint. Soaring dragon. The deep-water Black Snake King roared, and its giant body instantly churned up the endless seawater, sweeping off a section of seawater which eventually took the form of a water dragon and rushed towards the incoming great blood handprint attack. The roars of a dragon were constantly reverberating across the seabed. Boom! The two sides did not stay idle, and immediately started a decisive battle of life and death. With each collision between their blows, it seemed as if the world would collapse any second. Even the warships couldn't stand firm in the face of those terrifying shock waves. The entire sea was being destroyed. Bang! The blood splashed into the seawater. The flesh and blood flew in all directions. A large but fresh wound could be seen on the body of the deep-water Black Snake King. The deep-water Black Snake King suddenly screamed pitifully, while at the same time, he spat out a water sword from his mouth which turned into an ice-cold treasured sword and instantly rushed straight towards the old man. It was quite surprising to see that the old man stimulated Gen Qi inside his body, which burst out of his body and congealed into a bloody big hand. This scarlet big hand instantly caught the water sword and crushed it, and right after that, the big hand rushed towards the deep-water Black Snake King. Everyone was shocked while watching this scene. They were quietly watching this battle as everyone knew that this end result of this battle was ultimately going to decide the life and death of the two sides. Their own fights were basically insignificant in this situation. Boom! There came a terrifying burst of sound, and the old man's big bloody hand directly pierced through the tail of the deep-water Black Snake King and ripped it off the very next instant. Yi Shiwen was quite surprised because this black-clothed old man was way too powerful than an average half-step legendary expert. Just like in the case of Qi Fifan, other half-step legendary experts weren't the match for this old man as well. If the deep-water Black Snake King was not seriously injured, he wouldn't be in such a miserable state. The deep-water Black Snake King was screaming again and trying to get away, but a bloody big hand was constantly in his pursuit. Boom! Accompanied by a terrifying sound of an explosion, that bloody big hand grabbed the deep-water Black Snake King. Since the old man already knew that the deep-water Black Snake King was injured, he couldn't possibly let go of this chance of slaughtering this formidable beast. "I don't want to die." The deep-water Black Snake roared, but its skull was directly grasped in the big bloody hand and instantly crushed, splashing the brain fluid and blood into the seawater. Dash. Chapter 211. The 8th Prince arrives. 2 months flew by, and for the Great Yu State, the war was getting more and more intense during the past 2 months. The royal clan had sent out its forces to siege for Mainbai Majiao strongholds. The scope of war was getting bigger and bigger. Yi Shiwen was also following the conquests of imperial forces. They performed distinguished service and achieved illustrious military exploits. The reputation of initially low-key 9th Prince also rose up dramatically. Now everyone knew about his exploits and achievements. The people had come to realize that perhaps the 9th Prince was yet another suitable candidate for the throne of Great Yu State. However, for Yi Shiwen, it seemed as if all of these achievements didn't have any relations with him. He only spent 1 month with the 9th Prince's Legion, then rushed back to Yuan School, and began closed-door training. Now it's been a month since Yi Shiwen began the closed-door training, but it was nothing in the eyes of most people. After all, martial cultivation was something that continued for hundreds of years. However, the real problem was that a few days ago, the 8th Prince finally came back from an ancient ruin, and must have brought back some extremely valuable treasures from that place. The strongest expert of the younger generation, the Supreme Presence, was finally back as a legend. But mostly everyone in Yuan School was aware of the case. They knew that the duel between Yi Shiwen and the 8th Prince would most likely happen soon. Although the sect head had personally announced that he did not give the permit to this duel. But the 8th Prince was not the type of man who would honestly obey the instructions. Everyone was kind of unsure in their hearts. But regardless of what everyone was thinking, the 8th Prince finally arrived for Yi Shiwen. A figure suddenly appeared flying from the void, and at the place where he descended, the air itself ruptured and pulled open the vacuum. It could be seen that a mighty existence had arrived at the main gate of Yiyuan School. Yi Shiwen, come out to die. A young man, clad in a magnificent dragon robe and carrying a cold look on his face, suddenly roared. He had such a dominating presence that it swept off waves of lingqi in the air that went rolling across the gate. The entire surrounding was in a state of shocking chaos. One could clearly see that the 8th prince was courageous enough to clamor like this in front of Yiyuan School's gate. The 8th prince was soaring in the sky. The long spear in his hand was producing a buzzing noise, while there was a strange blood-red aura surrounding it. This blood-red aura was actually filled with the essence and blood of the enemies that had been killed by this spear. This spear was such a kindaf tool which could grow stronger as it continued to absorb the blood from the enemies. This caused a sensation throughout Yiyuan School. So many years had passed since the last time someone dared to be so arrogant to pull off such a stunt. A huge crowd of Yiyuan School's disciples arrived at the gate, but they were watching from afar. They simply didn't dare to approach because they could clearly sense a kind of cold and strange murderous aura. Even the true disciples didn't dare to go too close. They only surrounded the 8th prince while maintaining some distance. At this time, the disciples were worried for Yi Shiwen. To be fair, they were well aware of the fact that Yi Shiwen was very formidable. A few months ago, they had come to know about the profoundness of his skill and cultivation when they heard his fierce roar. No wonder he was made the 5th pro-disciple at such a young age. But the great strength of the 8th prince was not hidden from anyone. He dared to be so unruly in front of the main gate. The kindaf courage he had was not something an ordinary expert could display so casually. The dreadful imposing aura swept across while he was at the center of the formation of a huge field, which was solely made up of Zhenyuan. If anyone went in, they would be in his absolute control. 8th prince, you are really presumptuous if you think you can be so rampant in front of my Yiyuan School's gate. A figure arrived floating from a peak. It was a true disciple. He was a genius of Yiyuan School, although not as talented as Qi Fifan and the other strongest true disciples. But he was also prestigious, very young, only about 100 years old, and had already stepped into the 6th stage of Truth Realm. He was one of the genius peerless experts with limitless future prospects. In fact, the sect had put great efforts in nurturing a genius like him. You are courting death. Do you actually think you alone can stop me? The 8th prince said with a disdainful smile on his face. More than 100 years of practice, but you are nothing but a waste. You are bringing about your own destruction. That disciple's face suddenly flushed with anger. Even though he knew that in the future he would probably not be an opponent of the 8th prince, but as an especially nurtured genius disciple of the sect, his pride would not allow him retreat. The true disciple instantly shot, and eternal light descended from the sky and swept towards the 8th prince. I'll fulfill your wish of dying. The 8th prince shot as well, and instantly swept off as if a mountain of Zhenyuan which went whistling towards the incoming attack. The 8th prince's attack immediately swept away as many things as possibly in the surrounding area. Boom! As the two attacks collided severely, it seemed as if the heaven and the earth were collapsing, setting off overwhelming air explosions everywhere. However, in just a flash of contact, the 8th prince's attack routed that true disciple's attack and instantly rushed towards that genius true disciple, while sweeping away all of the things on the way along with it. All of a sudden, he was completely cornered and had no way out. Poof! The genius disciple suddenly spurted out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying upside down. He got blasted away horizontally, and his body was almost torn to pieces. As he fell down and fainted, the other true disciples immediately took him to the depths of Yiyuan School to find an elder to treat him. Everyone held their breath when they saw how the 8th prince used just one shot to seriously wound that true disciple. This 8th prince truly possessed earth-shattering might, and even the experts at the same cultivation level weren't his opponents. At this time, the disciple realized that this outcome was definitely the result of the 8th prince's recent adventure trip to an ancient ruin. No one knew what kind of heritage and treasures he obtained there, which turned him into such a fearful expert. Probably, he was now almost 10 or maybe 100 times more powerful than before. Pay attention, you ignorant disciples of Yuan school. The eighth prince said contemptuously. Sooner or later, I will bring you all under my royal reign. At this time, one could see the anger burning on the faces of Yuan school's disciples. After all, the eighth prince was actually looking down on them. However, after witnessing the scene where the blue sky was dyed red with that true disciple's blood, no one dared to step forward. Arrogant fool, don't you know you are standing right now? Suddenly, a voice burst out of the depths of Yuan school. And just then, the void was directly torn apart and a big hand instantly grasped towards the eighth prince. This was the power of the world law, and it firmly fixed him on the ground. Old fool, we old guys shouldn't intervene into the matter of young people. Abruptly, a hoarse voice transmitted from behind the eighth prince. And in a flash, a big hand stretched out and severely clashed into the other big hand. Boom! A loud and terrifying explosion occurred and completely distorted the space. Now, everyone came to know that there was tyrannical expert behind the eighth prince, standing in his support. It should be a peerless master who backed the eighth prince. No wonder he dared to come alone to Yuan school. But since he had a peerless master with him, he would be most useful than a mighty force. Humph! Our head has already said that this duel is not allowed, do you not know? The voice coming from the depths of Yuan school asked. You should understand, this is the matter of young people. We must not meddle. In our young times, didn't we go on expeditions like this? Just remember, the winner takes all. The hoarse voice immediately replied. You old fox, don't you try to tamper with the concept, you know what our head means. Yi Shiwen has not yet fully grown up, and know that if this duel is to take place 10 years from now then we won't be having this argument right now. What if we send Qi Fifan to fight with your eighth prince? Will that make you happy? The voice coming from Yuan school said disdainfully. The voice remained silent this time. However, the eighth prince suddenly spoke. The period of 10 years is too long, I make good use of my time. I will surely manage to increase my cultivation at the same rate he does for the next 10 years, so even after 10 years he will be easily slaughtered by me, so why do you stop me now? The eighth prince sneered and said, I'm invincible and no matter how powerful my enemy is, I will kill them all. One could see an absolute self-confidence hidden in his strong words, which were definitely the result of going on expeditions for so many years. Yi Shiwen, I am ready to pull down my cultivation to match with yours. Now I dare you to take up my challenge. The eighth prince shouted and the mighty sound waves instantly swept off towards Yuan school. Can it be that you are too scared to come out? Are you afraid of death? Several disciples were holding their anger. Although the eighth prince willingly pulled down his cultivation level, but he was still at a higher level, and must have grasped several deeper world laws and principles, giving him a big advantage over Yi Shiwen. Why not, since you are really dying to die, I'll gladly buy you a ticket to hell. An ice-cold voice arrived from the depths of Yuan school, and the blue silhouette of a person rushed flying from a peak. At this time, a youth clad in blue clothes flew towards the eighth prince. He released a dreadful imposing aura which was surging high into the sky. His eyes were as deep as the stars as he was coldly staring at the eighth prince. Yi Shiwen arrived way too fast, and a dense bluish aura swept out of his body. There was an incomparably horrifying aura creeping around his body, giving him the presence of the reincarnation of an ancient emperor. They didn't collide, but their terrifying auras severely collided, and set off shockwaves in all directions. So you finally came to meet your death. The eighth prince said in a cold voice. Chapter 212. Same level showdown. So you finally came to meet your death. The eighth prince said in a cold voice. Just because your practice time is 10 years ahead of mine, don't get ahead of yourself. Yi Shiwen contemptuously sneered. I'll crush you like an ant under my feet if we fight at the same level. You're just trying to provoke me, but I will kill you, no one can save you now. The eighth prince said in a cold voice, then took a step forward, and took a commanding gesture, while intently watching Yi Shiwen. The eighth prince's eyes were shining just like the ice-cold iron while a large mass of Zhenyuan was roaring on his body. There was an invincible confidence on his face, and it could be seen that he was not at all conceited about his strength. The terrifying strength he was displaying right now was the reason behind his unmatched self-confidence. Chop down this bastard prince into pieces. Does he actually think of himself as the emperor of Great Yu State? He is nothing but an arrogant prince. Yes, there are over a dozen princes in the empire. The whole avenue is filled with princes. Might as well consider them as dogs. Don't hold back and completely chop him off. The disciples of Yuan school suddenly started to clamor. If the 8th prince was fighting at his full strength, then in their eyes, Yi Shiwen wouldn't have a shred of chance of winning, but now the situation was different. Yi Shiwen was able to kill Feng Kong, who was at a higher level. So how could he possibly lose in the same level battle? You are done for because even on the same level, I am invincible. The 8th prince coldly snorted and said, "We won't be sure about that before the battle starts." Yi Shiwen said in a cold voice, even if the 8th prince was on a higher level, it would be difficult to defeat him, but if it were to lose in the same level battle then he might as well just commit suicide. The killing intention was surging and causing air explosions everywhere, producing violent explosion sounds. Both of their killing intentions were colliding fiercely, and none of them seemed to yield. Yi Ziwen's imposing aura completely released out, just like dreadful sea waves, and swept across the surrounding area. The terrifying aura of Truth 4th stage instantly released out, as he stared coldly at the 8th prince. It seemed like both of them were prepared to begin the same level battle any second. After practicing for a month, Yi Shiwen finally broke from the peak of Truth 3rd stage to the peak of Truth 4th stage in one fell swoop across, but his battle efficiency didn't fully achieve a breakthrough to the Truth 6th stage. Although he expected his battle efficiency to reach the Truth 6th stage, but it still remained in the small Truth realm. Truth 5th stage. There was a huge difference between the battle efficiencies offered by Truth 5th stage and Truth 6th stage. In fact, even if Yi Shiwen was able to break into the Truth 4th stage, his battle efficiency could only touch the early traces of Truth 6th stage. However, Yi Shiwen was confident that if he could break through to the Truth 5th stage, his battle efficiency would directly step into the peak of Truth 6th stage, and then he would also be able to contend with the experts of Truth 7th stage. This time, this major enhancement in Yi Ziwen's cultivation was mainly due to the Deepwater Black Snake King's Naiden. After he was beheaded by the black-clothed old man, Yi Shiwen had discussed with the 9th prince about handing over the Naiden to him. The 9th prince also very readily agreed to Yi Ziwen's request, because he knew that this Naiden would help towards crazy enhancement in Yi Ziwen's strength. And as he had already said that they had a common enemy, therefore he didn't hesitate in handing it over to Yi Shiwen. Also, by relying on this half-step legendary realm Naiden, Yi Ziwen's cultivation skyrocketed all the way from the peak of Truth 3rd stage to the peak of Truth 4th stage, and so far, he had only consumed 1/3 of the entire Naiden. If the 8th prince hadn't arrived all of a sudden, then he would have continued to consume the remaining Naiden, and would have reached all the way to the small Truth realm. By that time, he could have sufficient battle strength to deal with the 8th prince at full strength. Now the 8th prince was at the peak of Truth 6th stage, and he had reaped big benefits from his adventure trip to ancient ruins. However, he didn't have time to consume the looted exploits from the ruins. As soon as he obtained the news about Feng Kong's death at the hands of Yi Shiwen, he was very furious and rushed back. No one dared to lay their hands on his Imperial Guards, but this Yi Shiwen actually slaughtered the commander of Imperial Guards. How could he possibly tolerate such a thing? Ha 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 ha. The 8th prince laughed while a domineering aura was overflowing throughout his body, and his cold eyes were glaring at Yi Shiwen, as if he was looking at a dead man. It seemed like no one else existed in his world but himself. The 8th prince was exuding a transcendental aura, as if he had been baptized in the ancient ruins. After returning from that place, he had become much more extraordinary than before. Well, since it's the same level battle, it should be fair. The voice transmitted from the depths of Yuan school, and the big hand extended towards the 8th prince's body, and placed a seal on his cultivation, limiting it to the small Truth realm, thereby making his cultivation level same as that of Yi Shiwen. Even now, the 8th prince still held a considerable advantage. After all, Yi Shiwen could only compete with experts of small Truth realm or below, but only when his opponents were ordinary experts, and the 8th prince couldn't be taken lightly, considering his 10 years of extra experience and unbeatable battle record. Not to forget, he was the undefeated genius of the younger generation, so his battle prowess was going to be tyrannical, even with the seal on. Whatever be the case, there was self-confidence brimming on his face even after the seal was applied on his cultivation by the big hand. He was certain that he would kill Yi Shiwen today, not to mention, it could be said that even after applying a seal on his power, he was still at a higher level than Yi Shiwen when considering Yi Ziwen's actual cultivation level. If he was still unable to kill Yi Shiwen, then he might as just commit suicide. Prepared to die? Here I come. The 8th prince roared, and his roar broke through the limits of rivers and mountains. He rushed straight towards Yi Shiwen, while bringing shock waves of air along with him. It seemed as if a massive mountain was falling towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also roared at the same time, and instantly released a tremendous amount of Zhenyuan from his body, and immediately, a long blade appeared in his hand as he furiously chopped out a large arc of blade light towards the 8th prince. Boom! The spear in the 8th prince's hand severely collided with Yi Ziwen's long blade, and induced a terrifying blast in the surrounding region. This blast was so intense that it twisted the space itself, and sent both of them flying back. The battle efficiency of both sides was incomparably horrifying. Since Yi Shiwen could display the battle strength of Small Truth Realm, and despite being sealed to Small Truth Realm, the 8th prince could still display the battle strength of higher levels, thanks to his huge battle experience. This round could be considered as a draw, pertaining to the same level of skills the two of them showed just now. When the 8th prince had heard the news about Feng Kong's death, he got so angry that it seemed as if his anger would burn the sky. He couldn't wait to consume the exploits from his latest adventure, and directly rushed to kill Yi Shiwen. If he had gotten a chance to assimilate the treasures, then he would be much more tyrannical than now. Yi Shiwen was slightly surprised a moment. How could the enemy be so terrifying even after suppressing his level to the Small Truth Realm? No wonder he was so confident that he came straight to Yiyuan School from the ruins, solely to kill Yi Shiwen. If the 8th prince hadn't suppressed his cultivation level, then while facing him at his real strength, perhaps, Yi Shiwen really wouldn't stand a chance. But Yi Shiwen did not lose confidence even though the enemy was so formidable. So what if the enemy was tyrannical? As everyone said, if Yi Shiwen was given the option to practice for 10 years, he would be able to take on the 8th prince. However, what they didn't know that he actually wouldn't require 10 years to surpass the 8th prince. I can see that you have got some means to fight back, but you and I are sworn enemies from the moment you opposed me, and without a doubt, you are doomed to die. The 8th prince slowly expressed his hatred. Yi Shiwen was somewhat speechless. When did he actually choose to oppose this 8th prince? In reality, he had been forced into all of this mess. However, afterward he certainly did things to provoke the 8th prince. His overbearing style could be easily inferred. In fact, it could be easily traced back to the same origin as that of Feng Kong and the other imperial guards. However, it was obvious that he was completely mistaken about the concepts of power and prestige. One could literally see stars exploding in Yi Ziwen's ice-cold eyes, as if the universe was taking birth in the depths of his eyes. You talk too much nonsense. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly, and the long blade danced in his hand. A long arc of blade light crawled through the sky and fell towards the 8th prince. This blade attack was so tyrannical and terrifying. It seemed as if the sky was breaking apart into several pieces. The 8th prince's spear pierced through the sky, and layer after layer of energy waves swept across in all directions, while the tyrannical spear attack advanced towards Yi Ziwen's blade attack. The spectators could clearly hear the roaring sounds of two mighty forces, but Yi Shiwen, in particular, appeared exceptionally overbearing and tyrannical. It seemed as if he commanded a mighty force. In fact, even his imposing aura resembled that of an overlord of the battlefield. Yi Ziwen's killing intention and imposing aura were so overwhelming that they were directly affecting the people's consciousness. In a flash, the blade attack fiercely collided with spear attack, and resulted in an astounding explosion. Boom! A giant mushroom ascended towards the sky. The two tyrannical attacks mutually obliterated each other, and gave birth to this giant mushroom cloud which continued to get bigger and swept across, engulfing everything on the way. The disciples suddenly looked frightened. Was this really a duel between two experts at small truth realm? Some of the disciples were caught in the aftermath of that terrifying explosion and were seriously injured. If they were not being protected by the barrier enchantment, set up and maintained by an elder of Yuan school, which blocked most of the complementary shock waves from the blast, then they wouldn't have survived at all. But even so, some of the disciples got injured because several cracks appeared on the barrier enchantment. Due to that, the elder who was charged with maintaining the barrier enchantment had to increase its toughness in order to resist the upcoming tyrannical collisions like this. Boom. They collided again since there wasn't the slightest pause in this duel. Both sides continued to attack again and again. An incomparably scary light erupted in the horizon and completely obscured the entire sky. Chapter 213, Four Sacred Beasts. Not even a minute had passed since the duel began. But the two experts already exchanged more than 10 moves, with each being extremely terrifying and earth-shattering. Their speeds were rising slowly and gradually, and in a while, to the eyes of spectators, it seemed as if both of them turned into colorful streamers of light, and were rapidly colliding back and forth. In fact, the Xiantian-level disciples could merely see the fierce collisions between a blue light and a yellow light. And even for the truth-level experts, it was getting difficult to clearly observe this duel since they couldn't follow the movements of the two contenders. All they could see was a duel between two afterimages. It's really horrible that these two peerless heroes of this generation had to bump into each other so early. Right, although the 8th prince is arrogant, but we must admit that his strength simply goes against the heaven's will. He is definitely not some ordinary braggart. Even in a low-level battle with Yi Shiwen, he is able to display such battle efficiency. I must say that both his talent and strength defy the heaven's will. Although we must also consider that Yi Ziwen's cultivation level is too far behind that of the 8th prince, but he still managed to fight back on equal terms. Not to forget, even after putting the seal on the 8th prince's cultivation, the resulting level was small truth, and Yi Ziwen's actual cultivation is less than that, but Yi Shiwen still didn't fall under the wind. It is too shocking. I am afraid we will have to agree that Yi Shiwen really is a legend, the next rising chief fiefin of Yuan school. The disciples of Yuan school were discussing among themselves, and this time, they weren't discussing the arrogance and overbearing attitude of the 8th prince. After all, they witnessed his terrifying strength in this stunning duel, which captured all their attention. However, while they were discussing, the duel became more and more intense, and an astonishing collision occurred between the two. There's no point to this duel. All your resistance is futile since you are just a stepping stone and destined to become a pile of bones on the road to my success and glory. The 8th prince expressed his overbearing self-confidence in a loud voice. As soon his voice faded, four huge golden seals appeared out of nowhere and started spinning around him. At the same time, layer after layer of Zhenyuan started surging up in the 8th prince's body. And as his Zhenyuan was constantly bursting out of his body, these four huge golden seals instantly began to change shape. And in just a blink of an eye, huge beastly shadows appeared in the battlefield. Azure Dragon, Phoenix, White Tiger, Black Tortoise, these four god beasts instantly appeared in front of the 8th prince. Each of these beasts was huge, almost 100 feet tall, and looked magnificent while positioned in complete defense formation in front of Hima's, if pushing chock full. It seemed like in their presence, it would simply be impossible to approach the 8th prince. The four beast spirits, which transformed from the four huge golden seals, turned their heads towards the sky and began to roar fiercely. It seemed like their roars were shaking the entire world, as if the four sacred beasts had really descended from the heaven into this world. The 8th prince jumped onto the Azure Dragon's head and looked at Yi Shiwen like an ancient god of war. He appeared indifferent, heartless, and incomparably formidable. And while standing on that Azure Dragon's head, he seemed like the commander of the Heaven's Dragon community. The disciples of Yuan school were suddenly panic-stricken. In fact, even the true disciples had their complexions fade instantly when the 8th prince's terrifying coercion suddenly swept off. Suddenly, in the depths of Yuan school, several tyrannical experts started talking to each other through soul search technique. Could it be that the eighth prince has obtained the heritage of the ancient Four Sacred Beasts sect of the southeast region? Four Sacred Beasts sect. Are you talking about that mighty ancient sect that was rumored to have run amok in the ancient martial world, long back in the past? The Four Sacred Beasts sect was able to accumulate over 1 million disciples, and had outclassed all other rival sects in the southeast region, but later during the Devil invasion, it was completely destroyed. Their headquarters also disintegrated and fell into the turbulent flow of space. So this eighth prince managed to obtain the heritage of that ancient Four Sacred Beasts sect? It should be true because I have read about the Four Sacred Seals in some old antiquarian books. This is most likely the ancient martial technique of the Great Four Sacred Beasts sect. However, it's supposedly a top-tier martial arts technique, and I can see that the four beasts that have been summoned by the eighth prince are nothing like the real deal. The eighth prince must have used the blood of the demon beasts that contain the bloodline of the original Four Sacred Beasts, but even so, this technique is very ominous. It seems like Yi Shiwen is in big trouble. These four beasts are the guardian beasts between the heaven and earth. They are said to be the direct embodiment of the world laws. Now, while facing these four sacred beasts at once in this duel, he is going to fight at a great disadvantage. Don't forget, Yi Shiwen is no fool, and he is certainly not an ordinary person. He is a fierce and formidable figure, and will certainly have a way to deal with this situation. Yes, Yi Shiwen is a rare genius of our Yuan school. When he grows up, he will turn into the next Qi Fifan of our sect. Not to mention, he is one of the 5 pro-disciples and one of the brilliant disciples of the younger generation of Great Yu State. Our head has personally announced support and protection to him, so you can put your mind at ease and relax. Let's wait and see how the battle unfolds. Yi Shiwen, it appears that this eighth prince truly had a great and fortuitous adventure. Yi Mo's voice resounded in Yi Ziwen's mind. I never expected him to summon the 4 sacred beasts. Is it that terrible? Yi Shiwen asked. Of course, it's very powerful, and the genuine 4 sacred beasts are the supreme gods of heaven and earth. These beasts actually transcend the 3 realms, and are said to be the masters of all 5 elements. There are legends about them in all of the 10,000 worlds, and especially in your human world. Yi Mo said, there are rumors that they were entrusted with the task of guarding the 10,000 worlds, and in each world, they take different avatars. And all of the world laws between the heaven and the earth obey their command, granting them abnormally terrifying might. But fortunately, the eighth prince has summoned only their imitations. However, since these imitations have the features and powers of the original mythical beasts, it's going to be hard to deal with them. There was a sullen look on Yi Ziwen's face. He knew from the outset that the eighth prince was a tough opponent. After all, his subordinate, Feng Kong, too, was such a difficult guy to deal with. However, he wasn't the slightest bit discouraged. Defeating stronger enemies to prove that his way was right, this had been his style all along. Anyway, he had already planned to sweep away any and all obstacles in his way, and thereby pave the way to his destination, the peak of martial arts world. But before he could obtain the full explanation from Yi Mo, the eighth prince made his move. The dragon beneath his feet instantly moved, and rushed roaring towards Yi Shiwen. The horrifying aura of the 4 sacred beast spirits suddenly burst forward and pressed down towards Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if the eighth prince was the emperor of this world, like an omnipotent god, and right now, this god had directed all his might towards Yi Shiwen. This was the might of terror which directly swept towards Yi Shiwen. But at this time, Yi Shiwen also made his move, and poisonous dragon water control flag array instantly soared out, and the terrifying figure of Deepwater Black Serpent King suddenly appeared and coiled around Yi Shiwen. One could see dragon scales on its skin, the abnormally protruding 4 limbs, and the hook-like angled head. All of this was announcing that this Deepwater Black Snake King was about to evolve into a water dragon. Everyone gasped at this scene because they could clearly see that this beast was about to evolve into the realm of dragons. So horrifying. They could easily figure out that this beast used to be at the half-step legendary realm when it was alive, but it was then killed by Yi Shiwen, and its precious corpse fell into the hands of Yi Shiwen, who then used it to upgrade his divine tool. This actually transformed the image of Yi Shiwen in their hearts as that of a fearful expert. But only Yi Shiwen knew that this deep-water Black Snake King had been killed by the old man in black clothes. After being killed, its corpse fell into the hands of Yi Shiwen and was completely absorbed by the poisonous dragon water control flag. It was needless to say how precious the corpse of a half-step legendary realm demon beast actually was. Needless to say, this beast was also the king of deep-water black serpents. Hence, its corpse was an extremely precious treasure and could be used to refine powerful tools. But in order to win Yi Zaiwen's support by giving respect and honor, the ninth prince handed over the corpse of the deep-water black serpent king to Yi Shiwen. In fact, not just that, he also gifted the corpses of thousands of other deep-water black serpents to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen offered the sacrifice of the corpses of these deep-water black serpents to enhance the 18-surfaced poisonous dragon water control flag. In addition to that, he used the half-step legendary level corpse of the deep-water black serpent king to form a new array to the flag. Whiz 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 sound resounded several times, and from the side of Yi Shiwen, several deep-water black snakes flew out roaring from the poisonous dragon water control flag array. Looking at the mighty forms of these serpents, it seemed as if they were simply reborn because they had become much more formidable than before. Yi Shiwen obtained the corpses of over 1,000 deep-water black snakes and fed their souls to these original deep-water black snakes, making them transform into such mighty beasts, but because of the limited time, these few snakes could just evolve to the peak of truth 5th stage. However, in doing so, almost 1/5 of the total 1,000 deep-water black snakes were already consumed. This divine tool had not yet fully formed its battle efficiency as originally envisaged by Yi Shiwen. After a complete feeding time and fully maturing, all sides of the 18-sided poisonous dragon water control flag array would take true shape. Then at least each side of the flag array would be able to reach the truth 9th stage. Not to forget that one side of this flag array contained a half-step legendary realm beast soul. So, after successfully applying all the amendments to improve this flag array as he originally planned, the flag array would display its true might, and then with its help, Yi Shiwen would be able to contend with the experts of half-step legendary realm. In other words, right now, this flag array was just a semi-finished product. But even so, Yi Shiwen didn't have any other means to face the boundless might of the four sacred beasts. He could only bite the bullet and brace himself. One by one, the deep-water black snakes rushed forward on the battlefield, and suddenly numerous disciples were amazed at this scene. Some of them had previously witnessed Yi Zaiwen's flag array, but most of them had not seen such a magnificent divine tool. Chapter 214, 8th Prince's Fatal Error. At this time, there was a look of shock on the 8th Prince's face. He never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually have such a hidden card. However, now he didn't have a way out of this situation. He must finish what he started and behead Yi Shiwen in order to save his reputation. On one side stood a large array of the four sacred beasts, namely the Azure Dragon, White Tiger, the Phoenix and the Black Tortoise. While on the other side stood the even bigger array of 19 gigantic deep-water black snakes of poisonous dragon water control flag, and not to forget that one of them being the deep-water black snake king. All the disciples had horrified expressions on their faces as they were anticipating an earth-shattering collision between these two peerless geniuses. Between the two of them, any of whom could be considered as an unimaginably tyrannical presence. The four sacred beasts and the gang of deep-water black snakes severely collided. Boom! Giving rise to an inexhaustible air explosion, and forming a large vacuum belt. It seemed as if the surrounding space had been shattered by this explosion. Both sides were submerged in the terrifying fluctuations of space and energy, while at the same time, the deep-water black snakes and the four sacred beast spirits fiercely rushed towards each other and clashed maliciously. The entire air was boiling as the fierce beastly roars continued to resound throughout the region. There was chaos everywhere while the surrounding space was slowly cracking and collapsing. It seemed just like the collapse of this entire world. The terrible scene scared everyone to death, as they could clearly see that this decisive battle was almost reaching its end. Roar! Roar! All kinds of horrifying beastly roars were directly impacting the clouds in the sky and shaking the atmosphere. This was truly a fight between ominous beasts, which was actually able to shake the heaven and the earth. Clang! Eighth Prince's spear was once again wrapped in a terrifying light. The dragon beneath his feet began to roar loudly, as he again advanced towards Yi Shiwen. The energy surrounding the spear started getting bigger and bigger, and fell towards Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if a mountain was collapsing upon him. The spear packed an invincible might, to the extent that it simply punctured through the atmosphere and spread chaos everywhere. This scene was literally like the birth of the world. There was a calm look on Yi Ziwen's face. He didn't say anything, he was very calm. Irrespective of the kind of attacks enemy was throwing at him, there was no way to shake his confidence. Yi Shiwen shot his long blade, releasing an equally fearful attack, in the form of blade light, towards the incoming attack. Yi Ziwen's blade attacks were extremely horrifying, to the extent that each of his blade attacks was capable of cutting open through the space. Boom. 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 The two experts collided again, but this time, they staggered away from each other. In a flash, the flesh and blood flew in all directions. The disciples felt their hearts tremble. Who was hurt? Whose blood was this? Yi Yuan School's disciples were naturally hoping that Yi Shiwen was okay, that it wasn't him who got hurt. As the light dispersed, everyone saw the Eighth Prince's figure, standing atop the Azure Dragon. They were shocked to find that his whole arm was almost torn off by Yi Ziwen's long blade, and the blood was constantly dripping down his arm. No one expected that Yi Shiwen would actually turn out to be so formidable, that he would manage to almost chop off the Eighth Prince's arm. After seeing the Eighth Prince's blood flying in front of their eyes, everyone was stunned. There was pin-drop silence on the battlefield. The Eighth Prince almost fell off the Azure Dragon's head. Could it be that the Eighth Prince was not a match of Yi Shiwen in a same-level duel? No, in fact, Yi Shiwen was only an expert of Truth 4th stage, and his enemy was an expert of much higher level. This in itself was not a fair fight, but even so, the duel should have been in favor of the Eighth Prince. In the end, what was the true extent of Yi Ziwen's strength? You actually dared to hurt me. Now no one can save you from my wrath. The Eighth Prince's body suddenly exuded a strange godly aura, and soon, the wound on his arm gradually began to heal, was no longer bleeding like earlier. There was a very simple reason behind why the bleeding suddenly stopped. It was because Yi Ziwen's Daoqi was still lingering in his wound, and was constantly devouring his wounds, so this was the fundamental reason why he could not recover. Just now, the strange godly aura instantly expelled Yi Ziwen's Daoqi, and allowed the bleeding to stop. Yi Shiwen sneered but didn't say anything, just looked coldly at the Eighth Prince. The Eighth Prince grinned cruelly while he was standing on the Azure Dragon's head, and holding a spear in one hand, and suddenly, he rushed towards Yi Shiwen. The spear in the Eighth Prince's hand began to produce buzzing noise and instantly evolved into a huge cage of energy, which then went towards Yi Shiwen in order to suppress him and choke him to death. Yi Shiwen didn't waste any time, just rushed forward and waved the long blade in his hand, thereby releasing 9 blade shadows, which then fiercely collided with the spear attack in the sky. Boom! The two attacks glittered as they severely collided, and suddenly began to exude terrifying rays of light in the sky. Poochie! The spear left a fatal wound on Yi Ziwen's waist, inducing a deadly trail of blood across his waist. This was the first time Yi Shiwen got injured in this duel, but the Eighth Prince was in a worse state. A horrible wound had opened up on his chest, and the blood was crazily oozing out of it. What's going on? That Eighth Prince actually fell under the wind. Yi Shiwen so casually switched from using blade-based attacks to using a sword skill to catch his enemy off guard. He carefully waited for the right moment to unleash the sword intention, a strange but deadly skill he picked up from that fearful swordsman. And right then, Yi Shiwen finally decided to go all out and fully unleashed his long-trained combat style. Blade Light, Sword Intention, Palm Shadow. One after another, Yi Shiwen was unleashing various techniques and skill without any rules and patterns, totally random. As if all of these skills were on his fingertips, and invoking them was a child's play for him. This clearly showed that he had a very high-level understanding of the martial arts, when compared to his peers. Gradually, the Eighth Prince was completely pressed under the wind. Needless to say, no matter how high level he was at before the seal was placed on him, but right now, the best he could do was display the might of small truth at best. And when considering the level of understanding of martial arts, who could possibly beat Yi Shiwen? So long as it was at the same level, no one could contend with Yi Shiwen. Not to forget, when Yi Shiwen was at Truth 3rd stage, he was able to compete with the experts of small truth level. And now that he stepped into the Truth 4th stage, he should possess enough battle efficiency to beat any and all experts of small truth level. Of course, 8th Prince was just too tyrannical, and that's how he managed to survive this long in the duel. Otherwise, any other expert would have been slaughtered in one shot by Yi Shiwen. Being able to last so long against Yi Shiwen, the 8th Prince certainly proved his well-deserved reputation. Of course, only Yi Shiwen and Yi Mo would think so. Everyone else was simply dumbfounded to witness that Yi Shiwen was prevailing in the duel. But now, the battle had thoroughly fallen into the hands of Yi Shiwen, and it was time to end this once and forever. Choosing to fight Yi Shiwen at the small truth level was really the biggest mistake committed by the so-called perfectionist, the 8th Prince. 8th Prince, your legend ends today. Your decision to fight me at the same level was the biggest mistake you'll ever make. Yi Shiwen gave out a loud shout, and a burst of energy broke out of his body. Chapter 215. 8th Prince defeated. Perhaps if the 8th Prince was in his peak condition, he might have been able to kill Yi Shiwen, but it just so happened that he was too conceited and made a fatal error of challenging Yi Shiwen to the same level duel. Everyone was anxious at this moment. They were fully aware of the extraordinary prowess of these two experts, and the fact that both were capable of effortlessly beating any expert of small truth realm. But at this time, the young among the two was able to completely suppress the other. But, I was so sure of your death, the 8th Prince said with an unwilling look on his face. He was cursing himself for committing his biggest mistake. Rather than blaming himself for being so conceited, he was feeling pain in his heart for facing such a miserable situation. Conquest between peerless experts of each generation was always an extremely cruel occurring, and everyone knew that, but in every generation, there were always few experts who were able to reach the summit of the conquest, and later in life, they would also come to control several major forces. If only these two could have avoided this duel, at least in few decades, they would have certainly obtained influential positions in the major forces of Great Yu State. But the duel took place ahead of time. Yi Ziwen's battle strength was too terrifying, and he easily managed to suppress the 8th Prince. 8th Prince's spear possessed tremendous might. Each of its strikes was capable of shattering the space. It seemed to be releasing a tyrannical qi, which was as if coming straight from the grasp of the kind of the world. And each blade attack of Yi Shiwen seemed to be cutting open the world itself, and breaking the entire universe. While they were fighting and clashing with each other, it would appear like a terrible collision between two planets, leaving the horrifying aftermath of the explosion everywhere. And with each collision, the enchantment barrier would almost collapse by shattering into several pieces and dispersing. The disciples held their breaths as these scenes of terror continued to unfold in front of their eyes. These two men were undoubtedly the supreme leaders of the younger generation. Especially, the true disciples were simply frustrated to death after witnessing such a scene. Of course, they were among the elite geniuses of Yiyuan school, but when compared with the two peerless geniuses fighting in front of their eyes, their own accomplishments were nothing. They had the kind of feeling their hair fall off to the ground, while thinking about the shame they felt for not having the capability to carry on such a fight. After all, their strength was far worse. This in itself was not necessarily going to determine the winner of the conquest, as long as the vast majority of peers could be beheaded. And in that case, the battle between these two could have been avoided. However, now the fight was close to the end, and since the 8th Prince's ambition was to dominate the world, he actually needed to destroy all obstacles with his own hands. The 8th Prince looked up towards the sky and gave out a long and loud battle cry. And at the same time, a terrifying burst of monstrous energy rushed throughout the spear in his hand. 8 Prince's previous heroic aura had disappeared, and only a boundless killing aura remained in its place. His tall stature appeared quite domineering, just like a huge mountain, when he suddenly rushed towards Yi Shiwen. However, he still couldn't injure Yi Shiwen. In fact, his attack was easily blocked. The eighth prince was incomparably overbearing, to the extent that even though he had been fully suppressed by Yi Shiwen in the duel, he still didn't switch to defensive play and kept on going all out. An example of infinite courage. The duel is reaching its end so soon? I never expected that the dignified eighth prince would be so close to facing a disastrous defeat. It's strange, Yi Shiwen is too strong, and witnessing his performance in this duel, he is certainly worthy of the title of Yi Yuan School's fifth pro-disciple. The eighth prince really had it coming. He actually wanted to use Yi Shiwen as his stepping stone in his world quest. Even if our head declared his full support and protection of Yi Shiwen, he still dared to pull off such a stunt. This clearly shows that he looks down on us. All of the disciples felt that this duel's outcome would be out any minute. Yi Zaiwen's facial expression looked even more callous while the blade light completely quelled the eighth prince. Eighth prince roared again and again, and suddenly shot his spear, which stabbed towards Yi Shiwen like an endlessly falling mountain. The approaching flying spear looked dazzling and colorful, just like a small sun. Look at yourself, now you are nothing but a cornered beast. Yi Shiwen roared and shot his palm, which then turned into a coiling dragon and flew towards the incoming spear. Boom! The resulting horrifying blast even obliterated the atoms in the atmosphere. The eighth prince's spear collided with Yi Zaiwen's dragon claw and stagnated. It simply couldn't advance. Yi Zaiwen's both hands turned into coiling dragons and soared towards the sky, like two god beasts, suppressing and obliterating everything in the surroundings. Eighth prince's face finally revealed a look of panic and terror. In so many years of his life, he had never been suppressed so thoroughly by anyone. Now that he was facing Yi Shiwen, he was just like a cornered beast. No matter how much he tried, it was still extremely difficult for him to escape from Yi Zaiwen's attacks. Yi Zaiwen's palm turned into a coiling dragon, which swept its huge tail towards the eighth prince. He used the strongest move of coiling dragon palm. Divine dragon swings its tail. Eighth prince was sent flying several hundred miles away, along with the spear, and finally fell on the ground. No one knew how many bones shattered in his body. His clothes were tattered, his hair scattered in all directions. He no longer looked like the heroic prince he was when he arrived earlier. Now he was just a miserable-looking warrior, who was on the verge of losing everything he accumulated so far in his life. But the duel was not over yet. Before the eighth prince could take a breath of relief, a spear came piercing across the sky and stabbed into his body. Eighth prince was simply not prepared for this and was directly pierced by the spear. Boom! The eighth prince was punched on top of a mountain peak by his own spear, and suddenly, the entire peak was cut off in half by the inconceivable might of the spear. The eighth prince was still struggling, roaring again and again. 1/3 of the mountain had already been smashed by the enormous might of the spear, but then suddenly, the fearful seal on the spear tip started to glow intermittently and instantly activated, thereby completely sealing off the prince's strength. Yi Shiwen flew across the sky and landed next to the pale-looking eighth prince, then said, "As pathetic as you are right now, do you still want to kill me? I told you, in a same-level battle, I will squash you like a bug. I dare you to fight a fair battle with me. Since my real strength was sealed by your elder, I couldn't show my complete strength." The eighth prince clamored, while there was still a murderous look in his eyes, but not so intense like earlier. "Fair, you say? How ridiculous. You are far above my level, but you still rushed here to kill me. Now you want a fair duel?" Yi Shiwen said in a ridiculing manner. The eighth prince was furious, but he couldn't do anything. Right now, his martial arts and skill had been sealed by his own spear, and he couldn't even move. So now you can stop going on expeditions. Maybe try next time in your next life. Yi Shiwen said, and the long blade instantly danced in his hand. The surrounding disciples immediately exclaimed and started celebrating. Yi Shiwen finally defeated the eighth prince and saved their face. And this was simply beyond anyone's expectation. However, if he killed the eighth prince, then it would create a huge sensation throughout the Great Yu State. After defeating the eighth prince, the one who actually intended to dominate the entire Great Yu State, it was obvious that Yi Shiwen was going to become very famous. "I refuse to accept this outcome," the eighth prince suddenly shouted, and this time, there was fear in his eyes. He was scared of Yi Shiwen since he had never bumped into a tyrannical expert like him. Yi Shiwen was just like an indomitable person, a truly fearful and bizarre existence, and the 8th prince finally realized it. Stop! A loud shout transmitted from far away, and suddenly, a big hand opened a crack in the space and stretched towards the 8th prince. Yi Shiwen frowned. How could he possibly forget the terrifying expert who arrived along with the 8th prince? Yi Shiwen immediately seized the 8th prince's body and threw across the sky. The 8th prince's body was sent flying at an extremely fast speed, and it escaped from the reach of that big hand. What do you want? Yi Shiwen said coldly and looked towards the void. Young man, this duel is over. That hoarse voice said. A skinny old man's figure suddenly appeared from the void. Duel, you say? You think this was really just a duel? Yi Shiwen sneered and said. This time you've won. Just respect the rule of so-called forgive and forget. The royal clan will owe you one. The old man said. Humph, what will I do with a royal favor? Do you think it's good enough to stand on level with this matter? Yi Shiwen said in a strict voice. To others, perhaps royal favor was heavy as a mountain, but the same didn't apply to Yi Shiwen. His origin was extraordinary. He had come from a much advanced world with advanced societies, where the hierarchical system of monarchy was already a long-gone tradition. He rushed here to kill me. There was killing intention filled in his heart when he challenged me to the duel. In fact, he even said that he would take my life today. And you say that this was just a duel? Yi Shiwen said disdainfully. If he had won, would you show up to stop him from killing me? If I hadn't defeated him today, he and his spear would have taken so many innocent lives of countless geniuses. Would you persuade him to stop and convince him otherwise? No, all you can do is teach me a lesson on forgive and forget. In the end, you just follow double standards. You treat yourself and others based on two different sets of standards. Look, Yi Shiwen, the road ahead is long. Even if you possess God-given wisdom and talent, but you are still young and far from being a legend warrior. There's a long way to go and you will face countless unknown obstacles along the way. So making a new friend is good for you. A hint of threat was apparent in the old man's words. Chapter 216 Demon Island Bell Rings. Look, Yi Shiwen, the road ahead is long. Even if you possess God-given wisdom and talent, but you are still young and far from being a legend warrior. There's a long way to go and you will face countless unknown obstacles along the way. So making a new friend is good for you. A hint of threat was apparent in the old man's words. Are you threatening me? Yi Shiwen's complexion suddenly became dark and filled with anger. I am just stating the fact, kid. The old man said in a casual manner. I don't need others to help me pave my way to success. Even if there are thorns in my way, I will completely chop them off and make my own way. Yi Shiwen was unmoved. He was standing in front of Yi Yuan's school and wasn't afraid of the enemy. Yi Shiwen consecrated to the unusual repugnance towards the royal clan. Earlier, when the 8th prince was challenging him to a fight to the death, this old man said that the elders mustn't get involved in the fight of the young ones. And now that his own disciple's life was on the line, he interfered without thinking twice about his own statement. Two sets of standards were pretty obvious in this situation. I remember how you said just now that the old guys mustn't get involved in the matters of the younger generation. Now you intend to go back on your words. Yi Shiwen said in a mocking voice. If I was the one nailed atop a mountain, would you come out to save me from your 8th prince? Look at the pious look on your face and the dignity you carry as an expert. It's fake in the end. You are not even ashamed of yourself, old man. You. The old man choked from the anger, bulging inside of him from Yi Shiwen's words, but he didn't dare to attack. After all, he was standing in front of Yi Yuan's school. If he actually dared to attack Yi Shiwen, neither him nor the 8th prince would go back alive. Not to forget, the 8th prince's entire stunt was like provocation, as if looking down on Yi Yuan's school. The 5 forces were capable of peaceful coexistence for so many years. Naturally, by not making sudden moves and abiding by the rules, and the 8th prince's everyday clamoring about dominating the world itself was no different from committing the taboo. Who would want the 8th prince in power? One could simply and smoothly kill the 8th prince on this reason conveniently, and no one would be able to say anything. Not to mention, the royal clan wouldn't say anything. In fact, many people would be clapping and celebrating. The competition in royal clan was more brutal than other forces. Although the 5 pro-disciples were competing for the seat of Yuan school's head, but they wouldn't stoop so low as to killing each other for its sake, because it was just a position and didn't give the right to continue one's own royal bloodline. However, the same was not true for the throne. 8th prince's death would greatly benefit the eldest prince, the 2nd prince, the 4th prince, and now the 9th prince was also in the race. Not to mention, other major forces were supporting the aforementioned princes, and they certainly didn't approve of the 8th prince's ambition. So, even inside the royal clan, there were many people who didn't approve of the 8th prince's actions. After all, they didn't want to mess with the other major forces. Since they were fully aware of the fact that royal clan alone wasn't responsible for the foundation of Great Yu State, in fact, without the help of other forces, it would have been impossible for the royal clan to achieve such a feat. Many people were scared that if the 8th prince really got the throne and waged war against the other forces, the end result would be the destruction of royal clan. The overall strength of Yuan school and the other major forces was tyrannical. They possessed several legendary-level experts, and while facing so many legendary-level experts, the imperial legions would prove pretty useless. Since the rule of strength and number didn't stand a chance in front of a legendary-level expert. Because of this, the royal clan was deliberately planning to keep strong ties with Yuncheng sect. By doing so, it was barely maintaining a balance of power with Yuan school and the other 2 major forces. Even if he wanted to dominate the world, he shouldn't have kept blabbering about it all the time. Fear controls all, and people instinctively fear unknown. Therefore, considering the hostile elements inside the royal clan who hated the 8th prince, the old man didn't dare to get involved. I am not the kind of person who easily gets scared of such empty threats. I just believe in fully repay of debt. Yi Shiwen sneered. And it seems today, it's going to be difficult for your 8th prince to escape from the death's claws. Yi Shiwen lifted his long blade, and was about to stab the 8th prince, and from the far distance, the old man's angry shout suddenly thundered. Ding! The melodious sound of a bell suddenly rang out of nowhere, as if transmitting from the sky, and instantly struck Yi Ziwen's mind. Yi Shiwen was completely left stunned for an instant. Ding! 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 One after another, the bell continued to ring. The old man looked at Yi Shiwen and couldn't understand what stunned him, but he saw the opportunity and immediately grabbed the 8th prince's body in his big hand and disappeared. You will pay for what you did today. Yi Shiwen, what's wrong? Wasn't he going to kill the 8th prince? Impossible. I can just feel Yi Ziwen's monstrous killing intention and anger. I don't understand why he didn't kill him while he had the chance. Then what happened exactly? God knows. Could it be that something happened and stopped Yi Ziwen's attack? Moments after the 8th prince was rescued by the old man, Yi Shiwen finally recovered and got extremely furious. However, what on the earth was that bell sound, and where did it come from? The news quickly spread throughout the Great Yu State among the warriors' community. After a long period of 50 years, the Demon Island bell rang once again in the sky of Great Yu State. There were lots of legends related to the Demon Island in Great Yu State and several neighboring countries. The older experts were not much concerned about the Demon Island because more or less, everyone knew about this strange island's connection with the younger generation disciples. Since the Demon Island only appeared once in every 50 years, and for an average person, it was a considerably long time. Naturally, no one knew about the background of the Demon Island. However, very soon, the legend of the Demon Island spread once again. According to the hearsay, long time ago, the Demon Island appeared in this world. There was no record of how long ago it really appeared, but after a cycle of every 50 years, it would appear in the East China Sea. Again, no one knew about the reason behind its appearance and disappearance and how it happened. Everyone knew only this much, that it would appear only once in 50 years, and each time with its appearance, a melodious bell would ring and call forth the chosen ones. Not anyone could listen to this bell's sound, because only the leaders of younger generation could hear the melodious sound of this bell, and only these chosen few could enter into the island. Those who couldn't hear the bell summons shouldn't even dream about going to the demon island. Therefore, many people considered the bell summon as a standard. Those who heard the bell ringing were considered as young heroes of their respective sections. 50 years ago, Chief Ifan went to the demon island and reaped great benefits over there. That's how he could become so strong. And after a lapse of 5 decades, the demon island once again rang the bell, which gave rise to countless rumors. And like last time, this time, Yi Shiwen heard the call of the bell, which also became a staple of conversation for countless people. After receiving the summons from the demon island, finally, even the unwilling and most stubborn people had to recognize Yi Ziwen's peerless talent and extraordinary abilities. This was no different from attaining instant glory overnight, since the demon island bell never summoned non-top geniuses. However, Yi Shiwen was not much excited or flattered about this, like everyone expected him to be. In fact, this thing was too weird since Yi Shiwen didn't know about the origin of this demon island. After continuously searching through books and materials for a few days, Yi Shiwen finally had a profound understanding about this demon island, and why it was famed as the killing fields of peerless geniuses. The Demon Island Bell Summon was not just for Yuan School, but for 10 countries of the Southeast region. Almost over 1,000 peerless geniuses from the 10 countries of the Southeast region were going to participate in this expedition. No one could count how many peerless geniuses fell during the last summons. Chief Ifan himself was an invincible expert of his generation and incomparably tyrannical, and largely because most of the peerless geniuses of his generation had already fallen in the Demon Island. 50 years ago, that time was one of the most miserable times for the Great Yu State. It lost more than 50 peerless geniuses in one fell swoop, and in the end, only Chief Ifan survived and returned from the Demon Island. In the end, what happened there, no one would ever come to know except Chief Ifan. However, even if the situation was relatively good, as many as only a dozen people would manage to come back alive. And one must know that these weren't some ordinary disciples, but were considered the specifically cultivated peerless geniuses of various forces, the death of any of which would cause severe loss to the sect. It was said in the Southeast region that only those who would manage to come back alive from the Demon Island would be standing on the top of the pyramid of power. Therefore, although the Demon Island was called an elite meat grinder, but it still gave enormous opportunities to the brave young geniuses. That's why even after clearly knowing about the narrow escape, they would still choose to go. Several of them wanted to go because they were holding the thought they would either die on the Demon Island or come back alive to become the strongest figures among the 10 countries of the Southeast region. Moreover, these were the so-called elites among the geniuses and possessed great self-confidence. Every one of them was confident that they would be able to come out alive from the Demon Island. Anyways, there would a huge gap between the strength and skills of those who didn't go to the Demon Island and those who came out from there. So they were willing to take the fall and make good use of this chance. Now it was Yi Ziwen's turn to choose whether to go or not. I will go. Why wouldn't I go when everyone else is going? And if only one person will come out alive from there, that person would be me. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.